Where are you right now? Are you safe? Are you sitting in a comfortable chair, perhaps with the lights dimmed, listening to the hum of the modern world outside your window? It is easy to feel secure when history is just a story in a book. It is easy to judge the past when you are not smelling the smoke of burning cities or the stench of rotting flesh. But I want you to leave your safety for a moment. I want you to travel back with me to a time when safety was a lie, and the only law was the law of the sword. We are going to Jerusalem. The year is 1180. They tell you that the Crusades were a war for God. They tell you it was about faith. But if you dig deep enough, if you read the letters that were never meant to be published, and the diaries of the knights who died in the desert, you will find a different story. It wasn't a war for a tomb. It was a war for a secret. And the keeper of that secret was the most tragic, terrifying, and brilliant figure of the Middle Ages, King Baldwin IV, the Leper King. You have seen him in movies. You know him as the man behind the silver mask. History tells us he died young. History tells us he died without children because his disease made him sterile. History tells us his death triggered the fall of Jerusalem because there was no heir to take his sword. But what if history is wrong? What if the sterility of the king was a carefully constructed cover story? What if there was a child, an heir born in the shadows, hidden by the only men the king could trust? Tonight, we are going to open the door to the king's private chamber. We are going to hear the confession that the Vatican tried to erase. But before we step into the darkness, I have a question for you. If you were a king and you knew your child would be hunted by the entire world, would you claim him? Or would you erase him to save him? Think about that. Let me know your answer in the comments below, because by the end of this story, you might change your mind. To understand the secret, you must first understand the horror. In the 12th century, leprosy was not just a disease, it was a death sentence. It was a curse from God. A leper was considered walking dead, tamim. They were cast out of society, forced to ring a bell to warn the living of their approach. But Baldwin IV was not cast out. He was crowned. This is the great paradox of Jerusalem. The holiest city on earth was ruled by a man whose body was literally disintegrating. By 1180, the king is only 19 years old, but he looks like a corpse that has been dug up. His face is destroyed. His nose is gone. His fingers are rotting stumps. He is blind in one eye. He cannot feel pain in his hands or feet. To hide this horror from his court, he wears robes of silk and silver. He wears gloves. And according to the veiled history, he wears a mask. But while his body is rotting, his mind is razor sharp. Baldwin is a military genius. At the age of 16, with only a few hundred knights, he rode out to Montgisard and smashed the army of Saladin, the greatest conqueror of the East. He fought with his sword tied to his ruined hand because he couldn't grip it. He is a hero, but he is a hero with an expiration date. He knows he is dying, and he knows that the moment he dies, the vultures will descend. The vultures are his own family. His sister Sibylla is weak and easily manipulated. Her husband, Guy de Lusignan, is a fool, a vain, arrogant, incompetent man who wants the crown only for the glory. Baldwin knows that if Guy takes the throne, Jerusalem will fall, Saladin will return, and the Christian kingdom will be wiped off the map. The king needs an heir. He needs a son who carries his blood, the blood of the house of Anjou, the blood of the warrior kings. But the doctors tell him it is impossible. The leprosy has taken everything. The church tells him it is forbidden. A leper cannot procreate. His seed is cursed. But Baldwin is not a man who accepts the word impossible. He turns to the only group of men in Jerusalem who understand that sometimes, to do God's work, you must break God's laws. He turns to the Knights Templar. The Templars are the king's personal guard. They are the bankers, the diplomats, and the keepers of the Temple Mount. They know secrets about genetics and lineage that they found in the excavation of Solomon's stables, as we discussed in previous files. They know that leprosy is a disease of the flesh, not necessarily the germline. On a moonless night in the autumn of 1180, a meeting is called. It does not happen in the throne room. It happens in the crypts beneath the palace. The air is thick with the smell of myrrh and frankincense, heavy incense used to mask the smell of the king's necrosis. Baldwin sits in a chair in the shadows. Standing before him is the Grand Master of the Templars, Odo de Saint-Amand, or perhaps the acting commander, as Odo was often in captivity. The conversation that follows is not recorded in the official chronicles of William of Tyre. It was too dangerous, but echoes of it exist in the oral traditions of the Masonic Royal Arch. The king speaks. His voice is a rasping whisper, destroyed by the lesions in his throat. The wolves are at the door, Grand Master. Guy is a fool. Sibylla is blind. When I die, they will lose the city. The Grand Master nods. The order stands with you, my lord, but we cannot fight biology. You are the last of your line. Baldwin leans forward. The silver mask catches the candlelight. What if I am not? What if there is a way to secure the succession without the church knowing? This is the pivot point of history. The king is proposing a black operation. He is proposing to sire a child. Not with a queen, that would be public, but with a surrogate, a shadow mother. Or perhaps the child already exists. Perhaps in the early stages of his disease before the rot took his sensation, there was a moment of intimacy that the history books erased. The veiled history suggests that Baldwin wasn't asking for a miracle. He was asking for protection. He was telling the Templar, I have a son, but he is a secret. If Guy de Lusignan finds him, he will kill him. If the Patriarch of Jerusalem finds him, he will declare him a monster. He asks the Templars to do the one thing they are best at. He doesn't ask them to fight. He asks them to hide. Take the boy, the king whispers. Make him invisible. Be his father when I am gone. Why would the Templars agree to this? Why would the most powerful military order in Christendom risk everything to protect a bastard child of a leper king? To understand their motive, we must look at the Templar ideology. They were not Orthodox Catholics. They were Gnostics. They believed in the power of bloodlines. They revered Baldwin IV not just as a king, but as a sacred victim. In the ancient traditions of the Near East, a king who suffers for his people, a wounded king or fisher king, possesses a special kind of spiritual potency. His suffering buys favor from the universe. To the Templars, Baldwin's leprosy was not a curse. It was a sign of alchemical transmutation. He was burning away his mortality while still alive. They believed that his blood, precisely because it was afflicted, carried a powerful resistance. If a child could be born from that blood and survive, if the child could inherit the king's genius without the king's disease, that child would be a Superman. He would be the philosopher king that Solomon wrote about. The Grand Master looked at the dying king. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the strategic necessity. If the kingdom of Jerusalem was to survive the coming storm of Saladin, it needed a leader who was strong, intelligent, and legitimate. Guy de Lusignan was none of these things. The secret heir was the only hope. The Grand Master knelt. "The order is a tomb," he said. "What is put inside us does not come out. Give us the boy. We will raise him in the shadow of the temple. He will be one of us." The pact was sealed. But this created a massive logistical problem. Hiding a peasant child is easy. Hiding a royal heir, someone who carries the genetic markers of the kings of Jerusalem, is a nightmare. Jerusalem was a nest of spies. The hospitaliers spied for the Pope. The nobles spied for Guy. The merchants spied for Saladin. How do you hide a child in a fishbowl? You use the purloined letter technique. You hide him in plain sight. But you have to change his face. This brings us to the central mystery of the script: the mask. We associate the mask with Baldwin. But what if the mask was actually a tool created for the child? If the boy resembled his father, if he had the same pale hair, the same sharp features of the Anjou line, anyone looking at him would know the truth instantly. And worse, what if the boy showed the early signs of the disease? A numb patch of skin on the arm, a discoloration on the cheek. To protect him, the Templars had to institute a medical quarantine. They claimed the child, whoever they claimed he was, perhaps an orphan of a knight, was sickly. They claimed he had a skin condition that required him to be covered. They fashioned a mask, not of silver like the king's, but perhaps of leather or cloth. They raised him in the underground stables of Solomon's Temple, the headquarters of the order. The boy grew up smelling horses, steel, and old parchment. He was not taught entitlement. He was taught silence. He was taught that his face was a secret. He was taught that his life depended on his anonymity. While Baldwin IV was rotting on the throne, fighting battles he couldn't physically feel, his son was growing strong in the dark. The king would visit him. Imagine the scene. The Leper King, wrapped in bandages and silk, descending into the crypts to see the son he could never acknowledge. He couldn't touch the boy. He couldn't hug him for fear of infection. He could only watch from a distance. "You will be a king," Baldwin might have whispered. "But not yet. First, you must be a ghost." This was the ultimate sacrifice of Baldwin IV. He sacrificed his legacy. He allowed the world to believe he was impotent and cursed, allowing his name to end in history books, all to protect the biological reality of his line. But secrets have a way of leaking. By 1185, Baldwin was on his deathbed. His body had failed. He was blind, bedridden, and dying. The vultures were circling. Sibylla and Guy were preparing their coronation robes. The Patriarch of Jerusalem was preparing the funeral mass. But the Black Guard of the Vatican, as we established in the previous script, had picked up a scent. They heard rumors of a child in the temple. They knew that if Baldwin had an heir, the Pope's plan to control Jerusalem through the weak Guy de Lusignan would fail. The Vatican sent a message to their agents in the Holy Land. "Find the bastard. If he carries the sickness, cleanse him with fire. If he is healthy, cleanse him anyway." The timeline was collapsing. The king was dying. The enemy was at the gate. And the protectors, the Templars, realized that Jerusalem was no longer safe. They had to move the asset. They initiated protocol, Exodus. The funeral of King Baldwin IV would be the distraction. While the city wept for the Leper King, a small cart carrying a child wearing a mask would slip out of the Damascus Gate. They weren't just fleeing a city. They were fleeing history. The Leper King was dead, but the masked heir was just beginning his journey. Biology is a cruel accountant. It deals in probabilities, mutations, and decay. King Baldwin IV was a biological dead end. His body was a prison of necrotic flesh. His nervous system was shutting down. To the doctors of the 12th century, the idea of him fathering a child was not just impossible, it was grotesque. They believed that leprosy was a corruption of the seed. They believed that any child born of a leper would be a monster, a mooncalf, deformed and soulless. This was the dogma of the Church. But the Knights Templar did not follow the dogma of the Church. They followed the science of the East. The Templars had spent 60 years in the Holy Land. They had studied with Jewish Kabbalists. They had translated the medical texts of the Arab masters like Avicenna, Ibn Sina. They knew something the Pope did not. The germ line is separate from the somatic line. They knew that a man could be sick in his skin, yet carry a pristine code in his DNA. In the winter of 1180, following the secret meeting in the crypts, the Order initiated Project Genesis. The goal was simple: extract the genetic material of the House of Anjou before the host body expired. But to do this, they needed a vessel. They needed a mother. Finding a queen is easy. Finding a shadow mother is a nightmare. She could not be a commoner. The bloodline had to remain royal to hold the magical legitimacy of the throne. But she could not be a public figure. If Sibylla or Guy de Lusignan found out she was pregnant, she would be poisoned within a week. She had to be a ghost. The veiled history points to a woman whose name has been carefully erased from the chronicles of William of Tyre. She is referred to in Gnostic marginalia only as the votaress. Some say she was a cousin of the royal house of Jerusalem, hidden away in a convent because of a scandal. Others suggest a darker origin. They claim she was a descendant of the Desposini, the family of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, living in secret in the Holy Land under Templar protection. If this is true, the plan was not just to save Baldwin's line. It was to merge the bloodlines. To combine the warrior king, Baldwin, with the priest king, Jesus. To create a Messiah who could unite the East and West. The Templars located her. They brought her to the Temple Mount. She was not brought to a bedroom. She was brought to a laboratory. How does a leper king, who has lost all sensation in his extremities and whose body is racked with pain, consummate a union? The romantic view is that love found a way. The veiled history view is that science found a way. There is a persistent rumor in occult circles that the Templars possessed the knowledge of artificial insemination centuries before modern medicine. The Arabs used it for breeding horses. They would take the seed of a prize stallion on a sponge or a cloth and introduce it to a mare miles away. Did the Templar physicians, the Medici of the Order, adapt this veterinary science for a king? Imagine the scene deep within Solomon's stables. It is a medical procedure, not a wedding night. The king is present, but he is behind a screen. He is ashamed of his body. He does not want this woman to see the monster he has become. The Templar surgeon acts as the intermediary. This removes the risk of infection. Leprosy is contagious through prolonged skin contact. By using a mechanical method, the order ensured the mother remained clean. The seed was transferred. The ritual was complete. The votaress was taken away. She was moved to a secure location, a fortress in the desert, perhaps Chastel Blanc, guarded by the most fanatical knights of the order. For 9 months, the king waited. His condition worsened. He went blind. He could no longer ride a horse. He had to be carried in a litter. But his spirit remained unbreakable because he knew the asset was growing. But secrecy has a price. A pregnancy is hard to hide. A woman's body changes. Servants talk. The Templars had to create a disinformation campaign. They spread rumors that the votaress had died of a fever. They held a fake funeral. They buried an empty coffin. To the world, she was dead. To the order, she was the Ark of the Covenant. She was carrying the future of Jerusalem. But the greatest danger wasn't discovery. It was biology. What if the church was right? What if the baby was born with the mark of the beast? What if it had the lesions of leprosy? The Templars were taking a gamble with the highest stakes imaginable. Summer, 1181. The heat in the desert is oppressive. Inside the stone walls of the Templar safe house, the votaress goes into labor. There are no midwives. Midwives gossip. The delivery is handled by the battle surgeons of the order. Men used to stitching sword wounds, not delivering babies. The king is not there. He is in Jerusalem, holding court, pretending he is not dying. He waits for the signal. A carrier pigeon, a specific flag raised on a tower. The labor is difficult. The mother is small, the child is large. The Anjou blood is strong. And then, the cry echoes through the stone halls. The surgeon cleans the child. He brings it to the light. He inspects the skin with the scrutiny of a diamond merchant. He looks at the fingers. He looks at the nose. He looks for the white patches of the disease. The skin is clear. The gamble paid off. The boy is healthy. He is perfect. He has the pale hair of his father, the sharp eyes of the kings of old. But he is clean. The messenger rides to Jerusalem. He enters the king's chamber. He whispers 2 words. He lives. Baldwin IV, the man who never cried because his tear ducts were destroyed, reportedly trembled. The succession was secured. But now the Templars faced the moral horizon. The child was alive. But the mother was a liability. She knew the truth. She had a bond with the child. If she was ever captured by Guy de Lusignan's spies, if she was ever tortured by the Inquisition, she would reveal the boy's existence. And a mother will always try to see her son. She would break protocol. She would risk exposure. The Grand Master looked at the situation with the cold logic of a military computer. The secret, the individual. What happened next is the darkest stain on the Templar soul in this narrative. Did the mother die of childbed fever, a common tragedy of the time? Or was she euthanized? The veiled history suggests that she was given the cup of mercy, a draught of poppy and hemlock. She held her son for 1 hour. She named him, perhaps Baldwin V, though history attributes that name to his nephew. And then she went to sleep. It was a sacrifice. The Templars believed that a king of the New Age must be an orphan. He must belong to no woman. He must belong only to the order. By removing the mother, they ensured that the boy would have no loyalty to anyone but the Brotherhood. They could mold him. They could program him. They buried her in the crypt of the safe house. No marker, no name. She was the unknown soldier of the bloodline. The baby was wrapped in the white mantle of a Templar knight. He was placed in a cart, hidden beneath sacks of grain. He was moved back to Jerusalem, but not to the palace. That was a viper's nest. He was taken to the stables of Solomon. This vast underground complex beneath the Temple Mount could hold 2,000 horses. It was a city beneath a city. It was here among the war horses and the armories that the heir to the kingdom of heaven would be raised. But there was still one problem. The boy looked too much like his father. As he grew, his features became undeniably royal. Anyone who looked at him would see the face of Baldwin IV before the disease took it. And in a city full of spies, a face is a death warrant. The Templars needed a way to hide him in plain sight. They needed a way to let him walk through the markets, listen to the people, and learn the ways of the world without being recognized. They remembered the king's mask. the silver face that Baldwin wore to hide his rot. And they had an idea. If the king wore a mask to hide his ugliness, the son would wear a mask to hide his perfection. They fashioned a small mask, perhaps of leather or of beaten copper. They told the boy it was for his own good. They told him he had a condition, like his father, a lie to keep him compliant. "You must never show your face," the guardians told him. "The sun will burn you. The air will sicken you." The boy grew up believing he was a monster. He didn't know he was a king. He lived in the shadows, watching the knights train, learning the art of silence. He was the ghost of the temple. But time was running out. By 1185, King Baldwin IV was on his deathbed. The Leper King was rotting alive. His sister Sibylla and her husband Guy were already measuring the drapes in the throne room. They were celebrating their imminent victory. They didn't know that 50 feet below them, in the dark, a 5-year-old boy was sharpening a dagger. They didn't know that the sterile king had left a time bomb in the basement. The king is dying. The protection is fading. The Vatican's Black Guard has arrived in Jerusalem, sniffing for the scent of a bastard. The Templars must prepare for protocol, exodus. The funeral of Baldwin IV will not be an end. It will be the beginning of the greatest escape act in history. If you visit Jerusalem today and walk up to the Temple Mount, you will see the golden dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It is a place of blinding sun and stone. But if you go to the southeast corner of the mount, there is a staircase leading down. It leads into a vast, subterranean hall with vaulted ceilings held up by massive stone pillars. Historically, these are known as Solomon's Stables. In the 12th century, during the Crusades, this was the headquarters of the Knights Templar. It was capable of holding 2,000 war horses. It was a fortress within a fortress, a city beneath a city. And in the year 1181, it became a nursery. The child, born of the Shadow Mother and the Leper King, was brought here in secret. He was not given a royal chamber in the palace. He was given a cell in the crypts behind the armory, where the smell of oil and steel masked the scent of a human infant. The Templars named him Baldwin after his father, but they never spoke the name aloud. To the few knights who knew of his existence, he was simply puer occultus, the hidden boy. Imagine growing up in a world of stone and shadows. For the first 5 years of his life, the boy never saw the sun. He never felt the wind. His world was illuminated by torches and oil lamps. His lullabies were the chanting of monks and the sharpening of swords. He was raised by the old guard, knights who were too scarred or too elderly to fight on the front lines. These men became his fathers. They didn't treat him like a child. They treated him like a dangerous asset. They knew that if the boy cried at the wrong time, if he ran out into the courtyard, if a spy from the Vatican or the Lusinian faction saw him, the game was over. So they taught him the discipline of silence. Most children learn to speak by babbling. This boy learned to speak in whispers. Most children play by running. This boy learned to move without making a sound. He learned that noise equals death. The stables were a labyrinth. The boy knew every tunnel, every cistern, every secret exit that led out into the Kidron Valley. He was the ghost of the temple. While the pilgrims above prayed for salvation, the future king of Jerusalem was playing hide-and-seek with his own destiny in the dark. But as he grew, the resemblance to his father became impossible to ignore. He had the high cheekbones of the House of Anjou. He had the fierce, intelligent blue eyes of the king. Any courtier who looked at him would see Baldwin IV. And in a city crawling with spies, a face is a fingerprint. The Templars realized they could not hide him forever. Eventually, he would have to leave the crypts. He would have to see the world he was born to rule, but he couldn't be seen. So they created the technology of anonymity. They made him a face. We think of the man in the iron mask as a prisoner of Louis XIV in the 17th century. But the veiled history suggests that the concept of the masked heir originated here in Jerusalem 500 years earlier. The Templar artisans fashioned a mask for the boy. It wasn't the heavy, polished silver mask that his father wore to hide his rotting flesh. That was a mask of majesty. The boy's mask was a mask of subservience. It was likely made of boiled leather or beaten copper, designed to look like the bandages of a burn victim or a leper. It covered his nose, his cheeks, and his mouth, leaving only his eyes visible. The guardians told the boy a lie, a necessary, cruel lie to ensure his compliance. "You are sick," they told him. "You have the curse of your father. The sun will burn you. The air will poison you. If you show your face to a stranger, they will stone you." They instilled a deep, primal fear in him. They made him believe he was a monster. Why? Because a child who thinks he is a monster will hide himself. He won't try to rip the mask off in public. He will pull his hood down. He will avoid eye contact. He becomes his own jailer. This was psychological conditioning. It broke his ego. It destroyed his vanity. But it also gave him a superpower. When you have no face, you become an observer. When people think you are a leper or a cripple, they ignore you. They become invisible to you. They speak freely in front of you. The mask gave the boy the power of invisibility. By the age of 6, the Templars began to take him topside. Dressed in rough robes, his face hidden behind the leather mask and a deep hood, the boy walked the streets of Jerusalem. He walked through the markets. He walked through the church of the Holy Sepulchre. He saw the nobles, Guy de Lusignan, Reynald of Châtillon, strutting in their silks like peacocks. He saw them spitting on beggars. He heard them plotting against his father. He stood right next to the men who wanted to kill him, and they didn't even glance at him. They just saw another dirty, sick street urchin. He learned the most important lesson of kingship, the truth of the streets. His father, Baldwin IV, was stuck in the palace, surrounded by sycophants who lied to him. The son was in the gutter, hearing the real voice of the people. He learned how much bread cost. He learned which guards could be bribed. He learned which priests visited brothels. He was becoming a spy king. But the most intense moments of his life were the secret visitations. Once a month, usually during the new moon, a litter would arrive at the private entrance of the stables. The guards would bow. A figure wrapped in bandages would be carried down the stairs, the king and the heir. Imagine the scene in the torchlight. 2 figures, both masked, both hiding a terrible secret. One is rotting away, the other is growing strong. One is the past, the other is the future. Baldwin IV could not touch his son. The risk of infection was too high. Even though the Templars knew the germline was clean, physical contact with open sores could still transmit the bacteria. So they sat across from each other, separated by a few feet of stone floor. The king spoke to the boy. But he didn't tell him fairy tales. He gave him briefings. "Look at this map," the king would rasp, pointing with a silver pointer because his fingers were gone. "Here is Saladin. Here is Damascus. Here is the weakness in his supply line. Guy de Lusignan is a fool. He attacks head-on. You must never do that. You must be like water." The church cares only for gold. Do not trust the patriarch. Trust only the sword. Baldwin was downloading his strategic mind into the boy. He was teaching him the Game of Thrones before the boy even knew he was a player. The boy listened. He soaked it up. He worshipped this broken, dying man. He didn't see a leper. He saw a titan. And he realized that his own sickness, the lie of the mask, was a burden he had to carry to be worthy of his father. But the king was fading. By 1184, the visits stopped. Baldwin IV was bedridden. His eyes had failed. He was ruling the kingdom by memory and will alone. The Black Guard of the Vatican had arrived in Jerusalem. The Pope's spies were asking questions about a phantom child seen in the Templar compound. The Templars realized the net was tightening. The stable was no longer safe. The mask was no longer enough. They needed to prepare for the inevitable. The king was going to die. And the moment he took his last breath, the truce between the factions would shatter. Guy de Lusignan would seize the crown, and his first act would be to purge the city of any potential rivals. The Templars initiated protocol, false diagnosis. They needed to convince the world that the bloodline of the leper was biologically extinct. They needed to stage a medical deception so convincing that even the Vatican would close the file. They had to kill the boy on paper so the man could survive. And to do that, they needed a body. They needed a corpse of a child, roughly the same age, dead of a disfiguring disease, to present to the spies. The veiled history suggests that the Templars did not hesitate. They went to the lazaretto, the leper hospital. They found a dying orphan, and they prepared the switch. The stage was set for the funeral of the century. But the real funeral wouldn't be for the king. It would be for the identity of his son. While the Templars prepared the deception, the boy continued his training. But now, the training changed. It became physical. It became lethal. The Templars knew that a king who cannot fight is a puppet. But how do you train a boy to fight when he is supposed to be a sickly cripple? You train him at night. Deep in the cisterns, where the acoustics were dampened by water and stone, the boy learned the art of the blade. But not the heavy, chivalric broadsword fighting of the Franks. That was too loud, too clumsy. He was taught the fighting style of the enemy. The Templars had learned from the Saracens and the Hashishin. They taught the boy to use the short blade, the dagger, the curved scimitar. They taught him speed over strength, silence over glory. They taught him to kill in the dark. "You will not lead a charge," his instructor, a scarred Templar sergeant named Geoffrey, told him. "You will be the knife in the dark. You will be the shadow that kills the light." The boy became a weapon. His muscles grew hard under his rough tunic. His eyes, behind the mask, became cold and calculating. He was no longer the frightened child in the laundry chest, echoing the Mole script. He was a predator in training. He was waiting for his moment. But he didn't know that his moment would come not with a coronation, but with a catastrophe. In 1185, the bell of the Holy Sepulchre tolled. The sound echoed through the underground tunnels. It vibrated in the boy's chest. He knew what it meant. The king was dead. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, the Lion of Jerusalem, had finally succumbed. The shield of the kingdom was broken. Above ground, the city erupted in wailing. Sibylla and Guy de Lusignan began their maneuvering, but underground there was no weeping. There was only mobilization. The Grand Master came to the boy. He was wearing his full battle armor. "It is time," he said. "Put on your cloak. The wolves are coming." The funeral was about to begin, but in the confusion of the king's death, amidst the chaos of the succession crisis, the Templars were about to pull off the greatest heist of the Crusades. They weren't stealing gold. They were stealing the future. The cart was ready. The body double was ready. The masked heir was about to leave the womb of the temple and enter the wilderness. He was leaving Jerusalem, and he wouldn't return until the city was in flames. By the year 1184, the kingdom of Jerusalem was rotting from the head down. King Baldwin IV was still alive, but barely. He was a living relic, wrapped in silk to hide the fact that his flesh was falling away. He ruled by sheer force of will, but power hates a vacuum. And as the king weakened, the sharks began to circle. The biggest shark was Guy de Lusignan. He was a French adventurer, handsome but vacuous, who had seduced the king's sister, Sibylla. He was now the regent. He controlled the army, and he was terrified. Guy was not a smart man, but he was paranoid. He knew that the Templars hated him. He knew that the old nobility hated him, and he kept hearing whispers. Servants in the palace spoke of a ghost child seen in the Templar compound. Stable hands spoke of a boy wearing a mask who moved like a prince. The Vatican spies, the Black Guard disguised as pilgrims, reported that the Grand Master was spending too much time in the lower crypts. Guy realized the threat instantly. If Baldwin IV had a son, legitimate or bastard, healthy or sick, Guy's claim to the throne would vanish. The Templars would use the boy to depose him. He needed to know the truth. So he made a move. He went to the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Heraclius, a corrupt priest who was essentially Guy's puppet. "Demand an inspection," Guy ordered. "Tell the Templars that the Church has received reports of an unauthorized child in the holy precincts. Tell them we suspect heresy. Tell them we suspect the boy is a monster." This was a brilliant political trap. If the Templars refused to show the child, they would be accused of hiding a demon. If they showed the child, and he was healthy, Guy would have him killed immediately as a rival. If they showed the child, and he was a leper, he would be legally disqualified from the throne. The summons arrived at the temple. Grand Master Odo de Saint-Amand read the parchment. He looked at the wax seal of the Patriarch. He knew it was a death warrant. The order faced a tactical nightmare. They couldn't hide the boy anymore. The spies knew he existed, but they couldn't reveal him either. They needed a third option. They needed to show the court a child who was technically the boy, but who posed no threat. They needed to stage a medical show trial. The Grand Master called for the Surgeon General of the Order. "Go to the lazaretto," he commanded. "Find me a boy, same age, same height, but make sure he is dying." This is the cruelty of the veiled history. To save the true king, the Templars had to sacrifice a pawn. They went to the Order of St. Lazarus, the leper knights who ran the hospitals outside the walls. They walked through the wards filled with the stench of decay, and they found him. An orphan, 5 years old. His face was already ravaged by the disease. His voice was gone. He was in the terminal stages of lepromatous leprosy. He was a tragedy. But to the Templars, he was a decoy. They took the dying orphan. They dressed him in the rough tunic of the hidden boy. They put the leather mask on him, and they prepared him for the performance of his short life. The great hall of the Patriarch's palace was cold and imposing. On the dais sat Heraclius, the Patriarch, dressed in gold robes. Beside him stood Guy de Lusignan, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, his eyes scanning the room for treachery. The court was packed. Spies, nobles, and bishops waited in silence. The heavy doors opened. The Grand Master of the Templars walked in. He was unarmed, but his presence filled the room with a menacing gravity. Behind him walked 2 knights, and between them, holding their hands, was a small, trembling figure wearing a leather mask. A murmur ran through the crowd. "It is true," they whispered. "The ghost child exists." Guy de Lusignan stepped forward. He looked triumphant. "Grand Master," he sneered, "you have hidden the creature in the house of God. Unmask him. Let us see if he carries the curse of the king." This was the moment of truth. If the boy was healthy, Guy would signal his guards to seize him. If the boy was sick, the church would banish him. The Grand Master knelt beside the child. He didn't remove the mask immediately. He spoke to the court. "This child is a ward of the order, an orphan of a fallen knight. We hide his face not out of shame, but out of mercy." "Show us," Heraclius demanded. The Grand Master reached up. With a slow, deliberate movement, he untied the leather strings. The mask fell away. The court gasped. Some women turned away and covered their mouths. The face beneath the mask was a ruin. The nose was collapsed. The lips were ulcerated. The eyes were clouded with the milky film of blindness. It was the face of a monster. The decoy stood there, confused and terrified by the sudden light and the noise. He let out a low, rasping whimper. Guy de Lusignan stared at the boy. His hand dropped from his sword. The tension in his shoulders evaporated. He started to laugh. "Look," he shouted to the nobles. "Look at the Templars' hope. It is another corpse. The seed of Baldwin is rotten to the core." The patriarch stood up and pronounced the verdict. "This child is unclean. He is Tamim. By the laws of Jerusalem and the laws of God, no leper may sit on the throne, nor inherit land, nor command men. He is dead to the law." The patriarch ordered the child to be taken to the lazaretto to die among his own kind. The Grand Master bowed his head in mock defeat. "As you command, Your Holiness." The knights led the weeping decoy away. The court dispersed, buzzing with the scandal. Guy de Lusignan went back to his wine, secure in the knowledge that he had no rivals. The ghost child was just a sick orphan. The threat was neutralized. But Guy didn't notice one detail. When the Templars left the palace, they didn't go to the lazaretto. They went back to the temple. They gave the dying orphan a warm bed and a draught of opium to ease his passing. He died that night believing he was a prince. But deep in the stables, 50 feet underground, the real heir was waiting. He was sitting in the dark, wearing a fresh mask. He had heard the bells tolling. He knew what had happened. The Grand Master returned to the crypt. He looked at the healthy, strong boy with the fierce blue eyes. "It is done," the Master said. "You are dead." This was a profound psychological moment for the child. Legally, he no longer existed. His name had been struck from the book of life. The world believed he was a leper. The world believed he was garbage. "Good," the Master told him. "A dead man has no enemies. A dead man can move anywhere. You are now a shadow." The false diagnosis was a masterstroke of intelligence work. The Templars had used the prejudice of the age, the fear of leprosy, as a cloak of invisibility. By convincing the world that the heir was a monster, they ensured that no one would ever look for him again. But safety is temporary. In 1185, just months after the deception, King Baldwin IV finally succumbed to his disease. The shield of Jerusalem fell. Guy de Lusignan was crowned king, and Saladin, the Eagle of the East, gathered his armies. He knew that without the Leper King, Jerusalem was ripe for the picking. The war was coming, and a city under siege is a trap. The Templars knew they had to get the boy out before the Saracens surrounded the walls. They needed an escape plan, but they couldn't just walk out the front gate. The roads were watched. They needed a vehicle that no one would dare to stop. they needed a coffin. Protocol, Exodus was about to begin. The king was dead. Long live the ghost. March 16th, 1185. Jerusalem is sweltering under an unseasonal heat wave. The air is still. The birds are silent. It is as if the city itself is holding its breath, waiting for the heart of its protector to stop beating. Inside the royal palace, in a chamber hung with heavy velvet drapes to block out the merciless sun, King Baldwin IV is dying. He is 24 years old. He has ruled for 11 years. He has fought Saladin to a standstill. He has held the fractured kingdom together with a will of iron. But biology has finally won. The leprosy has consumed him. He is blind. His voice is a ruin. His body is a map of pain that no mapmaker could draw. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, Heraclius, is in the room, chanting the prayers for the dying. He is swinging a censer of frankincense, trying to mask the smell of necrosis. He is waiting for the king to die so he can crown Sibylla and Guy de Lusignan. But Baldwin is not ready to die yet. He has one final order to give. He lifts a bandaged hand. He whispers a command. "Clear the room. Leave me with the Grand Master." The Patriarch hesitates. He wants to be there to hear the king's last words and perhaps steal the royal signet ring. But the Templar guards at the door place their hands on their sword hilts. The message is clear. The room empties. Now it is just the king and Gérard de Riedefort, the new Grand Master, or perhaps the acting commander of the secret operation. This is the moment of transfer. In a normal monarchy, the king passes the crown to his son. In this veiled history, Baldwin passes the mission. Is he safe? The king rasps. He is in the crypts, the Grand Master replies. He is ready. Baldwin tries to sit up, but his muscles fail him. When the bell tolls, he says, Guy will close the gates. He will seal the city to hunt for rivals. You must move the boy during the funeral. Use my death as the cloak. This reveals the strategic brilliance of the Leper King. He knows that his own funeral will be the biggest event in the history of the Latin East. The entire city, soldiers, spies, merchants, beggars, will be lining the Via Dolorosa to watch the procession. The eyes of the enemy will be fixed on the dead king. No one will be watching the back gates. Baldwin reaches out. He cannot see, but he knows where the Templar is standing. He hands him a small object. It is not the crown jewels. It is a simple iron key. This opens the box in my private solar, Baldwin whispers. Inside is the map, the gold reserves, the list of safe houses. Give it to the boy when he is a man. Tell him I did not abandon him. I hid him so he could live. The Grand Master takes the key. He bows low, his forehead touching the stone floor. The order is his shield, he swears. He will not fall. A few hours later, the king's breathing changes. The death rattle begins. The physicians rush back in. The Patriarch begins the final absolution. And then, silence. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, is gone. The shield of Jerusalem has shattered. Immediately, the great bell of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre begins to toll. Dong, dong, dong. The sound rolls out over the city, over the hills, reaching the ears of the Saracen scouts watching from the Mount of Olives. They send a rider to Damascus, to Saladin. The message is simple. The lion is dead. But while the city erupts in wailing, while Sibylla weeps, perhaps genuine tears, perhaps not, and Guy de Lusignan smiles in the shadows. 50 feet underground, in the stables of Solomon, a different kind of activity begins. The Templars do not weep. They mobilize. They have a window of 24 hours before the coronation of the new king. In that window, they must execute protocol, Exodus. How do you smuggle a human being out of a locked city under martial law? You can't use a cart. They search carts for grain and weapons. You can't use a horse. They check riders. You can't use a tunnel. The exits are watched. You need a vehicle that is sacred. A vehicle that no guard, no matter how corrupt, would dare to open. You need a coffin. In the armory of the Templars, a wooden casket is prepared. It is not a royal coffin. It is rough-hewn, the kind used for a common brother knight who has died of a contagious fever. The lid is drilled with tiny, imperceptible air holes hidden in the decorative carving of the cross. The boy, the ghost child, is brought forward. He is 5 years old. He is wearing his leather mask. He is terrified. The sound of the bells above is deafening. He can feel the vibration at the stone floor. The Grand Master kneels before him. "Listen to me," he says, his voice hard and urgent. "You are going to play a game. The game is called the Sleeping Knight. You must lie in this box. You must not move. You must not cry. You must not sneeze. No matter what you hear, no matter if the cart bumps, you are dead. Do you understand?" The boy nods. He has been trained for silence his entire life. He climbs into the box. They place a flask of water and a small loaf of bread beside him. They place the iron key from his father in his hand. Then they lower the heavy wooden lid. The world goes black. The sound of the hammer driving the nails in is the most terrifying sound he has ever heard. He is buried alive. Above ground, the royal funeral begins. It is a spectacle of gold and grief. The body of Baldwin IV, wrapped in purple and gold, is carried on an open bier. Incense clouds the air. The patriarch chants. The crowds scream the name of the king. Guy de Lusignan walks behind the bier, looking solemn, but his eyes are darting around, counting the soldiers, checking the loyalty of the guards. But at the rear of the procession, far behind the nobility, a small group of Templars is moving a different cart. They are heading not for the Holy Sepulchre, but for the St. Stephen's Gate, the Lion's Gate. They are dressed in mourning blacks. They carry a banner of the order draped in black crepe. They reach the gate. The city guards block their path. "Halt!" the captain commands. "No one leaves the city. Order of the Regent Guy." The Templar sergeant steps forward. He looks the guard in the eye. "This is a brother of the order," he lies. "He died of the black pox. We are taking him to the plague pits outside the walls. Unless you want to open the box and breathe his air." This is the psychological barrier. In the Middle Ages, the fear of plague was greater than the fear of kings. The guard looks at the rough coffin. He takes a step back. He doesn't want to touch it. He waves them through. The cart rumbles over the cobblestones. Inside the box, the boy is bounced violently. His head hits the wood. He bites his lip to keep from crying out. He clutches the key. He holds his breath as the shadow of the gate arch passes over him. And then, the sound changes. The clatter of cobblestones is replaced by the soft crunch of gravel. The smell of the city, sweat, spice, and sewage, is replaced by the smell of dry dust and olive trees. They are out. The cart moves quickly now. They leave the road. They head east toward the wilderness of Judea, toward the Dead Sea. They are not going to a plague pit. They are meeting a convoy. 5 miles outside the city, in a dry wadi, a unit of Turcopoles, Templar light cavalry, is waiting. They pry open the lid of the coffin. The boy sits up, gasping for air, blinking in the harsh desert sunlight. He is pale. He is shaking. But he is alive. The sergeant lifts him out. He strips off the burial shroud and dresses him in the clothes of a Bedouin boy. "The king is dead," the sergeant says. Baldwin is gone. Your name is now Jean. You are a shepherd. They burn the coffin. They mount up. They ride hard, away from Jerusalem, away from the throne that is rightfully his. They are heading for the coast, for the city of Tyre, the last stronghold of the resistance. Back in Jerusalem, the funeral ends. Baldwin IV is lowered into the royal crypts. The stone slab is sealed. Guy de Lusignan is crowned King of Jerusalem. He thinks he has won. He thinks the line of Anjou ends with him. He doesn't know that the true king is riding through the desert, hidden under a keffiyeh, guarded by the deadliest swordsman in the world. But the danger isn't over. Saladin knows the king is dead. He knows the truce is broken. He begins to gather his army. The horns of Hattin are waiting, and the Templars know that to keep the boy safe, they might have to sacrifice their entire army to buy him a ticket out of the Holy Land. The Great War is about to begin, and the ghost child is going to have a front row seat to the apocalypse. July 2nd, 1187. The heat in the Galilee is not just weather, it is a physical weight. It presses down on the helmet, boils the blood, and turns armor into an oven. In the Crusader camp at Sepphoris, the water wells are full. There is shade, there is food. The army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, 20,000 strong, is safe. But 15 miles away, across a barren, waterless plateau, Saladin has laid a trap. He is besieging the city of Tiberias to lure the Crusaders out. He knows that if he can get them into the open desert in July, the sun will kill them before his archers even draw their bows. Inside the king's tent, a council of war is raging. On one side stands Raymond of Tripoli, a veteran lord. He is shouting logic. "Do not move," he pleads. "Between here and Tiberias there is no water. If we march, we die. Let Saladin take Tiberias. We must keep the army intact to protect the kingdom." On the other side sits King Guy de Lusignan. He is sweating. He is weak. He is terrified of looking like a coward, and whispering in his ear is the Grand Master of the Templars, Gerard de Riedfort. Historians have painted Riedfort as a villain. They call him arrogant, reckless, and stupid. They say he hated Raymond and advised the king to attack out of spite, but apply the veiled history filter. The Templars were the most disciplined, experienced military machine in the world. They knew the terrain. They knew the climate. They knew Saladin. It is impossible that the Grand Master did not know the march was suicide. So why did he push for it? Why did he bully the king into marching into a death trap? Because he wasn't trying to win a battle. He was trying to buy 3 days. The masked heir, the 7-year-old son of the Leper King, was currently in a caravan moving north along the coast, heading toward the impregnable island city of Tyre. But Saladin's scouts were everywhere. His light cavalry, the Saracens, roamed the countryside like wolves. If Saladin turned his gaze toward the coast, he would intercept the boy. The Templars needed a distraction. They needed to create a gravity well that would suck every single soldier in Saladin's army into one specific location, far away from the coast. They needed to offer Saladin a prize so tempting that he would ignore everything else. Riedfort looked at King Guy. He looked at the true cross, the massive golden reliquary containing the wood of Christ's crucifixion, which the army carried. He realized these were the bait. If the king marched into the trap, Saladin would commit 100% of his forces to crush him. He would strip the garrisons from the coastal roads. He would focus entirely on the destruction of the Christian army. Riedfort made a cold, horrific calculation. 20,000 lives for one life. He leaned into the king. "Sire," he whispered, "if you do not attack, the barons will call you a coward. They will say you are not worthy of Baldwin's crown. You must ride. God wills it. It was a lie. God had nothing to do with it. It was a tactical sacrifice. Rydfort was knowingly sending his entire brotherhood and himself into the fire to keep the ghost child off the radar. Guy took the bait. He ordered the march. At dawn, the army of Jerusalem left the safety of the springs and walked into hell. July 3rd, 1187. The march was a nightmare from the first hour. 20,000 men, thousands of horses, clad in heavy chainmail and wool padding. The temperature hit 95 degrees, 95 degrees by mid-morning. By noon, it was 40 degrees. Saladin didn't attack them head-on. He played with them. His mounted archers rode circles around the lumbering crusader column, raining arrows down on them. But his cruelest weapon was smoke. Saladin ordered his men to set fire to the dry grass and scrub brush upwind of the crusaders. The hot wind blew choking, black smoke into the faces of the thirsty men. Their throats were parched. Their eyes stung. They couldn't breathe. They were walking through a blast furnace. By the afternoon, discipline collapsed. Men were dropping dead of heat stroke. Others were breaking rank, running blindly toward the Sea of Galilee, visible in the distance but blocked by Saladin's army. They were cut down like wheat. Rydfort rode at the front with the Templars. He didn't drink. He didn't complain. He maintained absolute terrifying calm. His knights looked at him. They knew. They knew they weren't going to survive this. The secret instructions had been passed down to the inner circle. Hold the line. Die slowly. Give the boy time. They camped that night on a twin-peaked hill called the Horns of Hattin. There was no water. The men licked the dew off the rocks. They drank the blood of their horses. Below them, in the darkness, they could hear the Muslims chanting prayers and pouring water onto the ground to taunt them. Rydfort looked west, toward the coast. He calculated the speed of a cart moving toward Tyre. He is almost there, he thought. One more day. The sun rose on July the 4th. The final slaughter began. The Crusaders, mad with thirst, charged down the hill. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. The infantry surrendered. The cavalry was unhorsed. King Guy's red tent was collapsed. The true cross, the holiest object in Christendom, was captured, held upside down by Muslim soldiers. The kingdom of Jerusalem was destroyed in a single afternoon. But amidst the carnage, the Templars fought with a ferocity that stunned the Arab chroniclers. They formed a shield wall around the king. They fought until their swords broke. They fought until they were dragged down by sheer weight of numbers. They weren't fighting for the king. They were fighting for the clock. Every minute they held Saladin's attention was a mile of safety for the heir. Finally, the dust settled. The silence of the dead descended on Hattin. Saladin sat in his victory tent. He ordered the prisoners to be brought before him. King Guy, Reynaud of Châtillon, and Grand Master Gérard de Rydfort. What happened next reveals the true target of the war. Saladin was a chivalrous leader. He was known for his mercy. He offered King Guy a cup of iced water, a sign that his life would be spared. He killed Reynaud of Châtillon personally, for past crimes. But he spared most of the barons for ransom. But for the Templars and Hospitallers, there was no mercy. Saladin ordered every single knight of the military orders to be separated from the other prisoners. There were about 230 of them. Why? Historians say Saladin feared their fighting skills. He wanted to eliminate the fanatics, but the veiled history suggests a specific interrogation took place before the executions. Saladin knew about the secret. He had spies in Jerusalem. He knew Baldwin IV had been plotting something. He knew a coffin had left the city during the funeral. He looked at Rydfort. "Where is the bloodline?" Saladin might have asked. "You did not fight for this fool guy. You fought to hide something. Where is it?" Rydfort, beaten, bloody, but unbroken, remained silent. He knew the code of the order. Silence is the final weapon. Saladin realized he would get no answers, and he realized that as long as these men lived, they would try to rescue the boy. He ordered their immediate execution. It was not a clean beheading. It was a ritual purge. Saladin gave the swords to his Sufi scholars and mystics, not his soldiers. He wanted the spiritual men of Islam to kill the spiritual men of Christianity. The Templars were led out at sunset. They knelt in the sand. They did not beg. They did not pray to Jesus. They stared into the setting sun, perhaps visualizing the face of the boy they had saved. 230 heads fell. The desert drank the blood of the order. Grandmaster Rydfort was spared, temporarily, perhaps because Saladin thought he could still extract information from him, or perhaps to use him to negotiate the surrender of the cities. Rydfort would later be executed at the siege of Acre. But the sacrifice worked. While Saladin was busy slaughtering the knights at Hattin, the ghost child had reached the gates of Tyre. Tyre was the only city that did not fall. It was commanded by Conrad of Montferrat, a ruthless Italian lord who was an ally of the Templar underground. When the Bedouin cart arrived at the gates, Conrad didn't ask questions. He saw the Templar signet ring the boy carried, the key from Baldwin. He opened the gates. He hid the boy in the citadel. Saladin swept through the kingdom. He took Acre. He took Ascalon. And on October 2nd, 1187, he took Jerusalem. He entered the Temple Mount. He purified the Al-Aqsa Mosque with rosewater. He smashed the Templar altars. But he found the stables empty. The archives were gone. The genetic asset had vanished. The Horns of Hattin was a tactical defeat, but a strategic victory. The Templars had lost the army, the cross, and the city, but they had saved the king. Now the board had cleared. The kingdom was gone. The Templars were decimated. The boy, Jean, the masked heir, was growing up in a besieged fortress in Tyre, watching the smoke of his father's kingdom rise in the distance. He was no longer just a hidden prince. He was the last hope of the West. But the Vatican wasn't done. The Pope, Urban III, reportedly died of shock when he heard the news of Hattin. His successor, Gregory VIII, called for a new crusade, the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart was coming. Philip Augustus of France was coming. They said they were coming to retake Jerusalem. But the Black Guard agents embedded in their armies had a different mission. They were coming to finish what they started in Paris. They were coming to Tyre to find the boy. And the Templars, reduced to a handful of survivors, had to make a choice. They couldn't hide him in the Holy Land anymore. It was too small. They needed to move him to a place where no one would look. A place of madness. A place of disease. They prepared a ship, not a warship. A leper ship. September 20th, 1187. Jerusalem is surrounded. Outside the walls, the army of Saladin stretches as far as the eye can see. 30,000 Saracen warriors, siege engines towering like wooden giants, and the constant rhythmic beating of war drums. They are ready to take back the holy city in a storm of fire and blood. Inside the walls, there is panic. The king, Guy, is a prisoner. The army is destroyed at Hattin. There are only 2 knights left in the entire city to command the defense. One of them is Balian of Ibelin. History portrays Balian as a noble hero who organized the defense to save the women and children. But the veiled history suggests Balian was executing a specific Templar protocol. He wasn't trying to win. He knew winning was impossible. He was trying to create a stalemate long enough to negotiate a clearance. Why? Because while the ghost child, the heir, was safe in Tyre, the archives of the order, the genealogical records, the maps of the safe lands, Americas, and the remaining artifacts of the Solomon excavation were still hidden beneath the Temple Mount. If Saladin stormed the city, he would find them. If the Vatican spies, who were trapped inside the siege, found them, they would destroy them. Balian had to buy time to sanitize the site. The siege lasted for 12 days. It was brutal. Saladin's engineers mined the walls. They used naphtha, Greek fire, to burn the fortifications. The smell of sulfur and roasting meat hung over the Mount of Olives. But on September 30th, the walls were breached. The Muslims raised their flags on the ramparts. The city was ready to fall. But then, the fighting stopped. Saladin didn't order the final charge. Instead, he waited. Why? Because Balian of Ibelin had sent a message so terrifying that it froze the Sultan's heart. Balian rode out to meet Saladin. He didn't ride as a beggar. He rode as a man holding a detonator. Historians record Balian's threat, but they often miss the gravity of it. He told Saladin, "If you do not give us safe passage, we will kill every Muslim prisoner in the city. We will kill our own women and children so they do not become slaves." And then Balian paused. He pointed to the gold dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. "We will burn your holy places. We will smash the Rock of the Prophet into dust. We will leave you a city of ash and curses." This was the doomsday option. To Saladin, the Dome of the Rock was the site of Muhammad's night journey. It was the third holiest site in Islam. To see it destroyed would be a spiritual catastrophe. Balian was threatening to nuke the soul of Islam. But the veiled history suggests Balian threatened something else too. He threatened to unleash the secrets buried underneath the rock. The Templars knew the hydraulic systems of the mount. They knew how to collapse the cisterns. They could turn the Temple Mount into a sinkhole. Saladin looked at Balian. Saladin was not just a warrior. He was an initiate of the Sufi mystic traditions. He respected Baldwin IV. He respected the Templars, even as he killed them. He realized that this was not a bluff. These Franks were crazy enough to do it. And so the Sultan blinked. He agreed to terms that shocked his own generals. He would not sack the city. He would not slaughter the Christians. He would allow them to ransom themselves. For a fee, 10 dinars for a man, 5 for a woman, they could walk out of the city free and untouched. This was unprecedented. In the 12th century, a conquered city is put to the sword. Mercy is a sign of weakness, but Saladin granted it. Why? Because the ransom wasn't about money. It was a cover charge. October 2nd, 1187, the gates of Jerusalem opened, not for an invading army, but for a departing one. Thousands of Christians streamed out of the Jaffa Gate. They carried their clothes, their pots, their children. It was a river of misery. But hidden within that river was the real payload. Saladin's soldiers stood guard, counting the gold coins as the refugees paid their exit fees. They searched for weapons. They searched for looted treasures. But they didn't search the books. The surviving Templar sergeants, disguised as monks and beggars, were carrying heavy bundles wrapped in dirty wool. Inside those bundles were the scrolls from Solomon's stables, the birth records of the ghost child, the medical journals of Baldwin IV, the maps of the Atlantic. Saladin watched from a high chair. Did he know? Some theories suggest that Saladin wanted the Templars to leave. He wanted the dark magic of the Franks out of his holy city. He wanted the Temple Mount purified with rose water, not haunted by the ghosts of Solomon's demons. He was evicting a tenant he was afraid of. But there was another group watching the Exodus with cold, predatory eyes. The Black Guard. The Vatican's agents had been trapped in the city during the siege. They were furious. They had spent the last month tearing apart the Templar quarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They had found the false medical records from Chapter 4. They had interrogated the nurses, and they had realized the truth. The leper child was a fake. The grave in the lazaretto was empty, or contained the wrong bones. The heir was gone. Now, standing at the gate, the Black Guard scanned the faces of the fleeing refugees. They were looking for a boy about 7 years old, a boy with Anjou eyes. They grabbed children from their mother's arms. They checked their faces for leprosy. They checked their eyes. The screams of the mothers added to the chaos. But they didn't find him, because the boy wasn't in Jerusalem. He was already in Tyre. The Black Guard realized they had been outmaneuvered. The siege of Jerusalem was a giant cage, but the bird had flown weeks ago. They watched the Templar monks carry their bundles away. They knew those bundles contained the proof of the bloodline. The leader of the Black Guard, a shadowy cardinal named Malvicino, made a decision. He couldn't stop the Exodus. Saladin's treaty protected them, but he could follow them. The refugees were heading for the coast. They were heading for Tyre. Tyre was the only city still in Christian hands. It was the gathering point for the survivors. Malvicino knew that if the heir was alive, he would be there. "We go to Tyre," he ordered his men. The final hunt begins there. While Jerusalem fell, the city of Tyre stood like a rock in the storm. It was an island fortress, connected to the mainland only by a thin strip of land. Its walls were high, its harbor was deep, and it was commanded by a man who was as ruthless as he was brilliant, Conrad of Montferrat. Conrad was an Italian adventurer, a cousin of the Holy Roman Emperor, and a fierce ally of the Templar underground. When the Bedouin cart carrying the ghost child arrived at his gates, back in Chapter 6, Conrad took them in. He hid the boy in the highest tower of the sea castle. For months, the boy, now going by the name Jean, lived the life of a prisoner. He watched the sea. He watched the ships arrive, bringing news of the fall of the kingdom. He saw the smoke of burning villages. He heard the adults whispering about the end of the world. But Conrad didn't treat him like a prisoner. He treated him like a student. Conrad was a master of politics. He taught the boy the harsh realities of power. "Your father was a saint," Conrad told him. "But saints die. If you want to live, you must be a sinner. You must learn to lie. You must learn to strike first." The boy's education continued. The Templar combat training was supplemented by Conrad's Machiavellian philosophy. He was learning that a king doesn't need a throne to rule. He needs a will. But Tyre was becoming crowded. The refugees from Jerusalem were pouring in. The city was bursting at the seams. And with the refugees came the spies. The Black Guard infiltrated the city disguised as wounded soldiers. They began to ask questions. "Is there a noble child here? Is there a boy kept in the tower?" Conrad's counterintelligence caught wind of them. He found 3 Vatican agents with their throats slit in the harbor. But he knew he couldn't kill them all. There were too many. And now, a new threat was appearing on the horizon. The Third Crusade. The kings of Europe were coming. Richard, the Lionheart of England, Philip Augustus of France. They were coming to save the Holy Land. But to the Templars, this was a disaster. King Philip Augustus was a puppet of the Pope. If he took control of Tyre, He would hand the city over to the church. The Black Guard would have free rein. And Richard? Richard was a wild card. He was brave, but he was arrogant. He supported Guy de Lusignan, the usurper. The Templars realized that the arrival of the saviors was actually an invasion. The veiled history suggests that the Crusaders weren't just coming for Jerusalem. The inner circle of the European monarchs knew about the bloodline. They wanted to secure it or destroy it to prevent a rival dynasty from challenging their own legitimacy. Conrad and the Templar Grand Master held a midnight council. "We cannot keep him here," the master said. "When the French army lands, they will search every room. They will find him." "Then we must move him again," Conrad said. "Where?" "The land is taken by Saladin. The sea is patrolled." The Grand Master looked out the window at the dark Mediterranean water. "There is one place no one looks," he said. "There is one ship that no one boards." He pointed to a black-sailed vessel, anchored far out in the harbor, away from the other ships. It flew a yellow flag, the flag of quarantine. It was a leper ship, a floating hospital for knights who had contracted the disease of Baldwin IV. They were the living dead, sailing until they died, forbidden to dock. "No one touches the unclean," the master said. "It is the perfect cloak." The plan was insane. To hide a healthy boy among rotting men. To put the last hope of the dynasty onto a ship of death. But it was the only way through the blockade. The boy was woken up. He was dressed in bandages again. He put on his mask. He was taken down to the harbor in the dead of night. He looked at the black ship. He smelled the stench of decay drifting across the water. He remembered his father. "This is your chariot, my king," the guardian whispered. "Ride it to freedom." The deal with the Sultan had saved the archives. Now the ship of fools would save the blood. But as the boy stepped onto the boat, leaving the solid ground of the Holy Land for the last time, he didn't know that his journey wasn't ending. It was just beginning. He wasn't going to Europe. The ship was heading for a secret island fortress that the Templars had just purchased. An island that would become the first Templar state. Cyprus. If you want to hide a ship in the ocean, you start a fire in the harbor. If you want to hide the escape of the last king to Cyprus, you start the biggest, bloodiest war the world has ever seen to keep the enemy looking the wrong way. August 1189, the Leper Ship, carrying the boy Jean, the masked heir, had slipped out of Tyre. It was heading west, into the open Mediterranean. But the sea is slow. The Vatican's spies were fast. If Saladin or the Pope's agents realized the boy was gone, they would send fast galleys to hunt him down. The Templars needed to create a blockade. They needed to turn the coast of the Holy Land into a zone of such intense violence that no ship could pass without being sunk, and no spy could move without being killed. They chose the city of Acre. Acre was the key to the coast. It was held by Saladin. King Guy de Lusignan, the usurper, recently released by Saladin, wanted to take it back to prove he was still a king. He marched his tiny, ragtag army to the walls of Acre and laid siege. It was a suicide mission. Guy was surrounded. Saladin's main army came down from the hills and besieged the besiegers. It was a double ring of death, but the Templars joined him. Why? They hated Guy. They knew he was incompetent. The veiled history suggests they joined him because Acre was the choke point. By engaging Saladin at Acre, the Templars ensured that the Sultan's navy was tied up defending the harbor. They ensured that every available soldier in the Middle East was sucked into the meat grinder of the siege. For 2 years, Acre became the Verdun of the Middle Ages. It was a nightmare of mud, disease, and trench warfare. Men didn't just die from swords. They died from arnoldia, trench mouth, scurvy, and dysentery. They ate their horses. They ate grass. They ate the leather of their boots. But the Templars held the line. They built massive siege towers. They launched raids. They died by the hundreds. To the historians, this looks like religious fanaticism. To the strategist, it looks like a rearguard action. Every day the siege continued was another day the Leper Ship put miles between itself and the danger zone. The Templars were trading their lives for distance. But the war attracted more than just soldiers. It attracted the kings of Europe. In 1191, the Third Crusade arrived. Philip Augustus of France, Richard the Lionheart of England. The Bay of Acre was filled with their ships. The saviors had come. But hidden within the French army was a unit that did not answer to King Philip. The Black Guard. The Vatican's hunters had followed the trail from Jerusalem to Tyre, and now to Acre. They knew the boy was not in Jerusalem. They suspected he had been moved. When the Crusaders finally breached the walls of Acre in July 1191, the Black Guard didn't join the looting. They went straight to the Templar command post near the harbor. They tore the building apart. They interrogated the scribes. They searched the shipping logs. They were looking for a specific entry. A medical transport, a ship flying the yellow flag. Departure date, late 1187, they found it. A logbook, partially burned during the siege, recorded the departure of the Sanctus Lazarus. Destination, classified. But a harbor master, tortured by the agents, whispered a name. Cyprus. They went to Cyprus. The Inquisitor General, who had traveled with the French fleet, realized the magnitude of the deception. The Templars hadn't just moved the boy. They were building him a kingdom. Cyprus is an island fortress. It is self-sufficient. It controls the shipping lanes. If the Templars established a base there, they would be untouchable. The Inquisitor went to King Richard the Lionheart. Richard was not a Templar, but he was a pragmatist. He needed money for his war. The Inquisitor whispered in his ear, "The island of Cyprus is rich. The Greek tyrant who rules it is an enemy of God. Take it." The Vatican was trying to weaponize the crusade to destroy the Templar sanctuary before it could be fully established. Richard turned his fleet toward Cyprus. The hunt was back on. But before the focus shifts to the island, we must witness the final act of the tragedy at Acre. During the siege, the Grand Master of the Templars, Gerard de Riedfort, was captured again. Riedfort is one of the most hated figures in history. He is blamed for the loss of Jerusalem. But the veiled history asks, why did he keep getting captured instead of killed? At Hatton, he was taken alive. At Acre, he was taken alive. Saladin usually executed Templars immediately. Why spare Riedfort? Because Saladin knew that Riedfort held the codes. He knew where the Solomon archives were hidden. He knew where the bloodline had gone. Saladin respected the game. He kept Riedfort alive to interrogate him. On October 4th, 1189, outside the walls of Acre, Riedfort was dragged before the Sultan for the last time. Saladin was tired. The siege was costing him thousands of men. "Give me the location," Saladin might have said. "Tell me where the boy is. Tell me where the ark is, and I will let you live. I will let your order survive." It was the ultimate temptation. Riedfort could have saved himself. He could have saved his knights from further slaughter. But Riedfort looked at the Sultan. He knew that the Sanctus Lazarus had reached safe waters. He knew the boy was alive. The mission was accomplished. The asset was secure. His life no longer had strategic value. Riedfort smiled. "The king is dead." He lied. The line ended in the desert. "You are chasing ghosts, O Sultan." Saladin saw the lie in his eyes, but he also saw the resolve. He realized he would never break this man. He nodded to his executioner. Ridefort was beheaded in the dust of Acre. His head was mounted on a spear. The Christians mourned him as a fool. The Muslims mocked him as a fanatic. Only the inner circle of the Templars knew the truth. He died to close the file. By dying without speaking, he severed the last link between the boy and the Holy Land. With Ridefort dead, the secret of the boy's location was held by only a handful of men, the guardians on the island of Cyprus. But King Richard was coming. The Lionheart had conquered Cyprus in a lightning campaign, officially to rescue his fiancée, secretly to seize the Templar assets. Richard sold the island to the Templars, then took it back, then sold it to Guy de Lusignan. It was a chaotic shell game of ownership, but amidst this chaos, the ghost child remained hidden. How? Because he was no longer a child. He was 12 years old. He was entering puberty, and the mask was no longer just a disguise. It was becoming a reality. The Templars on Cyprus had built a fortress in the mountains, St. Hilarion Castle. It is said to be the inspiration for the Disney Castle, but in the 12th century it was a prison. They locked the boy in the highest tower. They told him, "Richard is here. The Black Guard is here. If you step outside, you die." The boy looked out the window at the Mediterranean Sea. He saw the English ships. He saw the French ships. He realized that the whole world was looking for him. He felt the weight of his blood, the blood of the Leper King, the blood of the Shadow Mother. He realized that he would never be normal. He would never walk free. He was the king of the tower. And deep inside his DNA, something was waking up. The dragon blood of the Anjou line was reacting to the trauma. He began to have dreams, visions. He saw the future of his order. He saw the fire in Paris, 1314. He saw the fall of kings. He wasn't just hiding, he was incubating. The Templars were feeding him knowledge, strategy, and hatred for the church that hunted him. They were building the perfect anti-king. But to rule the world from the shadows, he needed a network. He needed an army that didn't just fight in the Holy Land. He needed an army that could operate inside Europe. And in the year 1192, a strange visitor arrived at St. Hilarion Castle, a man dressed in white, but carrying the daggers of the Hashishin, an emissary from the Old Man of the Mountain. The alliance was about to be formed. The Templars and the Assassins were going to join forces to protect the Heir, and the first lesson the Assassins would teach the boy was simple. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. History books tell us that the Crusades were a binary war, Christians versus Muslims, cross versus crescent. But this is a lie for children. Real geopolitics is never binary. It is a spectrum of gray. By 1192, the Knights Templar had realized a terrifying truth. They had more in common with the enemy than they did with the Pope. The Templars were Gnostics, seekers of hidden knowledge. And deep in the mountains of Syria, there was another group of Gnostics. They didn't pray to Mecca. They prayed to the hidden Imam. They were the Nizare Ismailis. The West called them the Hashishin, assassins. Their leader was Rashid ad-Din Sinan, known to the Crusaders as the Old Man of the Mountain. He was a master of asymmetrical warfare. He didn't have an army. He had operatives. He controlled the politics of the Middle East through the surgical removal of key targets. Kings, caliphs, and generals woke up with assassin daggers on their pillows, a warning that they could be reached anywhere. The veiled history suggests that in the aftermath of the fall of Jerusalem, a secret meeting took place. not on a battlefield, but on the island of Cyprus. The Templars held the masked heir, King Baldwin IV's son, in St. Hilarion Castle. But they knew that stone walls were not enough. The Vatican's Black Guard was hunting them. The Black Guard played dirty. They used poison, bribery, and stealth. A knight is trained to fight a soldier. He is not trained to fight a shadow. So the Templars outsourced the training. They invited the assassins in. It is a historical fact that the Templars and assassins had a strange relationship. The assassins paid tribute to the Templars. Historians say this was protection money. But apply the semantic pivot. In the world of secret societies, money flows up. If the assassins were paying the Templars, it implies a partnership. Or perhaps tuition. Imagine the scene at St. Hilarion. The fortress sits on a jagged peak, surrounded by clouds. A group of men in white robes arrives. They do not wear the red cross. They wear the sash of the Ismailis. They are led by a da'i, missionary Turk teacher. They are brought to the highest tower. They are introduced to the boy in the leather mask. The Templar Grand Master speaks. Teach him to see in the dark. Teach him to kill without a sword. Teach him that nothing is forbidden. This was the beginning of the Black Pact. The fusion of Templar discipline and assassin stealth. The boy, now 12 years old, was subjected to the mental conditioning of the hashishin. We are told the assassins used hashish, cannabis, to drug their killers, promising them a garden of paradise if they died. This is a crude propaganda story invented by Marco Polo. The veiled history suggests the hashish was not a recreational drug. It was a de-patterning agent. The instructors used chemical compounds to break down the boy's ego. They forced him to face his deepest traumas. The death of his father, Baldwin IV. The murder of his mother. The burial in the coffin. They made him relive these moments until the emotion was burned out, until he could look at death and feel indifference. They taught him the creed. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. This is not a license for chaos. It is a realization of high gnosis. Nothing is true. The laws of society, religion, and kings are illusions created to control the masses. Everything is permitted. The awakened man is bound only by his own will. The boy was learning that he was not bound by the morality of the church. He was a king in exile, and a king must be willing to burn the world to save it. But training is theoretical. The assassins believe in field testing. The boy had to bleed, and the Vatican was about to provide the target. The Black Guard of the Vatican had lost the trail in Tyre, but they hadn't given up. The Inquisitor General knew the Templars were hoarding something on Cyprus. He couldn't invade the island. Richard the Lionheart and the Templars controlled the sea. So, he sent a Trojan horse. In 1193, a wounded knight arrived at the gates of St. Hilarion. He wore the black mantle and white cross of the Hospitallers, Knights of St. John. The Hospitallers were the rivals of the Templars, but they were still Christian brothers. The code of chivalry demanded that they offer hospitality to a wounded man. The knight, who called himself Brother Thomas, claimed he had escaped a Saracen prison. He was welcomed. He was fed. He was given a room in the lower keep. But Brother Thomas was not a hospitaller. He was a cleaner, a top-tier agent of the Sancta Vem. He spent weeks observing. He mapped the castle. He noted the guard shifts, and he noticed the anomaly. Why was the high tower guarded by the elite inner circle? Why did food go up, but no one come down? And why, on moonless nights, did he see a small figure scaling the walls like a spider, the boy practicing his climbing skills? Thomas realized he had found the target. He prepared his weapon. Not a sword, too loud. He used a garrote, a thin wire meant to strangle silently. On the night of the new moon, Thomas made his move. He didn't need to fight the guards. He drugged their wine with datura, a skill the church also possessed. He slipped past the sleeping sentries. He picked the lock of the high tower. He entered the boy's chamber. The room was dark. A figure lay sleeping on the bed. Thomas crept forward. He raised the wire. He lunged. But the bed was empty. It was a pile of pillows. A decoy. Before Thomas could turn, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling. The boy had been waiting. The assassins had taught him, always assume you are hunted. Sleep with one eye open. Watch the door. The boy dropped onto the killer's back. He was small, only 12 years old. Thomas was a grown man, a killer. But the boy had the element of surprise, and he had a weapon the assassin didn't expect. The mask. As they wrestled on the floor, the boy headbutted the killer. The hard, beaten copper of the mask smashed into Thomas's nose, shattering it. Thomas screamed, blinded by pain and blood. He struck out wildly, throwing the boy across the room. The boy hit the wall. The wire missed his throat by an inch. Thomas drew a dagger. He lunged again. "Die, bastard!" he hissed. "Rome sends its regards." The boy didn't run. He remembered the lesson of the old man. When the enemy attacks with force, flow like water. He sidestepped. He used the killer's momentum, and he drove a small, curved assassin blade, a karambit, into the killer's armpit, finding the artery. Thomas fell. He grasped at his neck as the blood pumped out in black spurts. He looked up at the boy. He saw the mask, the blank, expressionless copper face staring down at him. He didn't see a child. He saw a demon. Thomas died choking on his own blood. The boy stood over him. He was shaking. The adrenaline, the dragon blood, was coursing through his veins. He had taken a life. According to the church, he was now a murderer. But according to the assassins, he had just passed his final exam. The door burst open. The Templar guards, finally awake, rushed in with torches. They saw the dead agent. They saw the boy cleaning his blade. They stopped. They didn't treat him like a child anymore. They bowed. The Grand Master entered. He looked at the body of Brother Thomas. "The Vatican has found us," he said grimly. "Cyprus is compromised." The boy looked at the master. His voice, muffled by the mask, was calm. Too calm. "Then we leave," he said. "We go where they cannot follow." The discovery of the spy changed the strategic calculus. Cyprus was an island, but it was too close to Europe. Too close to the Pope's reach. If one agent could get in, an army could follow. The Templars realized they needed to initiate protocol, ghost protocol. They had to disappear completely. They had to make the world believe the line of Baldwin was truly extinct. They staged a fake death. They announced that the sickly ward of the order had died of his disease. They held another funeral. They buried another empty coffin in the cemetery of Nicosia. To the Vatican spies watching from the harbor, the file was closed. The boy was dead. Mission accomplished. But in reality, the boy was being moved to the harbor of Limassol. A ship was waiting. It was not a warship. It was the Sanctus Lazarus again, the Leper Ship. But this time, it wasn't going to stick to the coast. It was rigged for an ocean crossing. The destination was the West. Not America, not yet. That was for the Sinclair voyage in 1398. They were heading for the most remote, isolated, and mystically charged location in the known world. The Azores, the Canary Islands, or perhaps the secret Templar fiefdoms in Portugal, Tomar. The veiled history, suggests they went to Tomar, Portugal. Portugal was the edge of the world. Finis terrae. The King of Portugal was a Templar ally. The Inquisition had no power there. The boy boarded the ship. He was no longer John. He was no longer the ghost child. He was given a new name, a Portuguese name, perhaps Gualdim Pais, a famous Templar master of Tomar. Or perhaps he became the shadow advisor to the king. As the ship sailed past the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar, and into the vast Atlantic, the boy took off his mask for the first time in years. He let the salt spray hit his face. He touched the scars where the mask had rubbed against his skin. He was free, but he wasn't finished. He carried the memory of his father, the Leper King. He carried the training of the assassins, and he carried the gold of Jerusalem, the hidden funds. He was going to build a new base, a base from which his descendants would launch the next phase of the war. They would not fight for a city in the desert. They would fight for the mind of Europe. They would build the Age of Discovery. It was the Templar ships, bearing the Red Cross on their sails, that would discover the world under the Portuguese flag. Prince Henry the Navigator, Grand Master of the Order of Christ, would lead them. And guiding them from the shadows, hidden within the royal genealogy, was the bloodline of the Leper King. The king who couldn't feel pain. The king who wore a mask. The king who survived. The Crusades were over. The global conquest was about to begin. If you wanted to move a nuclear weapon across a border today, you wouldn't put it in a luxury car. You would put it in a garbage truck. You would put it in a vehicle that is so repulsive, so socially invisible, that no customs officer would want to inspect it. In the 12th century, the Templars needed to move the nuclear weapon of the Jerusalem bloodline, the boy Jean, across the Mediterranean Sea. The sea was patrolled by the Genoese and Venetian navies, mercenaries who would sell their own mothers for gold, and who were currently on the payroll of the Vatican's spies. So the Templars commissioned a ship that was the medieval equivalent of a radioactive waste transport, the Sanctus Lazarus. It was a lazaretto ship. In the Middle Ages, lepers were sometimes loaded onto ships and cast adrift, or moved between island colonies. These ships were marked with a yellow flag. When a ship saw that flag, it didn't attack. It tacked away. It fled upwind. Sailors believed that even the air coming from such a ship could rot your flesh. This was the perfect stealth technology. Imagine the scene in the harbor of Limassol, Cyprus, in 1193. The boy, now 12 years old, climbs the gangplank. He is wearing his leather mask. He is wrapped in gray rags. The smell hits him first. It is the sweet, cloying scent of gangrene and old bandages. On the deck, shuffling in the shadows, are the crew. They are knights of the Order of St. Lazarus. They are lepers, men without noses, men with stumps for hands, men who are already dead but refuse to lie down. They are the guardians. They kneel as the boy steps onto the deck. "Welcome, little brother," the captain rasps. The captain is a giant of a man, his face completely covered in bandages, only his eyes visible. "Here, you are among your own." The boy realizes the terrifying irony. He is pretending to be a leper to hide among real lepers. His mask of deception fits perfectly into their reality of horror. The ship sets sail. It moves slowly, heavy in the water. As they pass the Venetian galleys patrolling the blockade, the Venetian captains look through their spyglasses. They see the yellow flag. They see the rotting figures on the deck. They cross themselves and turn away. The Black Guard agents on the Venetian ships surely saw the vessel, but their orders were to find a prince, not a floating graveyard. The Sanctus Lazarus slips through the net. It heads west. into the open, deep blue of the Mediterranean. But the journey is not just a physical voyage. It is a psychological crucible. Living on a ship of death changes a boy. He eats with them. He sleeps near them. He listens to their stories of battles fought and lives lost. He learns that the human spirit can survive even when the body is destroyed. He learns the ultimate Templar truth. The flesh is a trap. The will is eternal. This voyage hardened him. It burned away any remaining softness of the palace. He realized that to survive the Vatican, he had to become like these men, terrifying, repulsive to the weak, and utterly fearless. But the Mediterranean is a small lake. To be truly safe, they needed to leave the map. They needed to go to the edge of the world. To finish Terai, the destination was Portugal. Why Portugal? Because Portugal was a new kingdom, forged in blood by the Templars themselves. The King of Portugal, Sancho I, was a rebel. He owed his crown to the order. In Portugal, the Templars were not guests. They were the masters of the state. But to get there, the Sanctus Lazarus had to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules. In ancient mythology, this was the end of the world. Beyond it lay the ocean of darkness, the Atlantic. To the medieval mind, sailing into the Atlantic was suicide. But the captain of the Leper ship had a secret weapon. He didn't have the whispering head. That was with the other faction, as per our previous files. But he had the maps stolen from the Library of Alexandria before it burned. The maps that showed the currents. As the ship approached the narrow strait, a storm hit. It was a levanter, a fierce easterly wind. The ship pitched and rolled. The leper knights, unable to hold ropes with their ruined hands, lashed themselves to the masts. The boy was put to work. He had hands. He had strength. For 3 days, the Heir of Jerusalem worked as a common sailor. He hauled lines, he baled water, he screamed into the wind. This was his baptism of salt. The desert had forged him. The assassin castle had trained him. Now the ocean was claiming him. When they finally broke through the strait and entered the Atlantic swell, the water changed color. It went from the turquoise of the Mediterranean to the deep, bruising gray of the ocean. They were out. They had escaped the prison of Rome. The Pope's navies could not follow them here. They turned north, hugging the coast of the Iberian Peninsula. They sailed past the cliffs of Sagres, where, centuries later, Prince Henry the Navigator, a Grand Master, would launch the Age of Discovery. They were planting the seeds of the future. Finally, they saw the lights of a fortress high on a hill, overlooking the river Nabao, the castle of Tamar. Tamar was the Pentagon of the Portuguese Templars. It was built by Gualdim Pais, a legendary Grand Master. Its architecture was alien. It wasn't square. It was a rotunda, round church, modeled exactly on the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It was designed to be a download point for spiritual energy. The Sanctus Lazarus sailed up the river under the cover of a moonless night. The ship docked at a private quay. The gangplank was lowered. The boy stepped off. He was thin. He was exhausted. His skin was salty. Waiting for him on the dock was Gualdim Pais himself, or his successor. The old master looked at the boy in the mask. He looked at the ship of lepers. He bowed. "The blood has returned to the stone," Pius said. The boy was taken into the fortress. The leper knights who had brought him, the crew of the Sanctus Lazarus, did not disembark. They knew their duty. They were loose ends. They carried the secret of the location. If they lived, they might talk. If they were captured, they might be tortured. The veiled history, suggests a final, tragic sacrifice. The ship, with the crew still on board, was scuttled. It was sunk in the deep waters off the coast. The Leper Knights went down with their ship, taking the secret of the voyage to the bottom of the Atlantic. The boy watched from the battlements of Tomar as the mast of his saviors disappeared beneath the waves. He learned the lesson. Kingship is built on the bones of the loyal. Safely inside the walls of Tomar, the boy's life changed again. He was no longer Jean the shepherd. He was given a Portuguese identity. He became Dinas, or a name close to it, hidden in the genealogy of the House of Burgundy. Tomar was not just a castle, it was a vault. Underground, deep beneath the rotunda, the Corolla, the Templars had built a sanctuary. Here, the boy was introduced to the European branch of the order. He realized that the Templars weren't just in Jerusalem, they were everywhere. They were a global octopus, and he was the head. But he was still a secret. The world still believed the line of Baldwin was extinct. The Templars maintained the Iron Mask protocol. Even inside Tomar, the boy wore a covering. Only the highest initiates saw his face. Why? Because his face was the key. If a spy saw him, they would see the Anjou features. They would know. The boy grew into a man. He married secretly. The Templars brought him a bride from the Sinclair family in Scotland, reinforcing the alliance, or perhaps a daughter of the Emperor of Trebizond. They began to breed the next generation. But the boy, now a man, was not content to hide. He remembered the maps. He remembered the ocean. He spent his days in the Tower of Tomar, studying the charts brought from Solomon's temple. He saw the land masses to the west, the Antilles, the land of the 7 cities. He realized that Europe was a trap. The Vatican was too strong. The kings were too corrupt. If his bloodline was to rule, they needed a new world. He began to organize the expeditions. History tells us the Portuguese started exploring the Atlantic in the 1400s. The veiled history says it started in 1200 under the orders of the masked Heir. He sent the first ships to the Azores. He sent ships to the Madeira. He was looking for a safe haven, a backup drive for civilization. But while he planned the future, the past came knocking. The Inquisitor General in Rome had not forgotten. The Black Guard had lost the trail at sea, but they had found a new lead. A rumor of a hidden prince in Portugal. The Vatican sent an ultimatum to the King of Portugal. Open the gates of Tomar, allow the Inquisition to inspect the order, or face excommunication. The King of Portugal was an ally, but he was afraid of hell. He wavered. The Templars at Tomar realized they were about to be betrayed again. They had to move the asset. But where? Scotland was too far. The sea was dangerous. They needed a place that was closer. A place that was an island fortress, Cyprus. Wait, didn't they just leave Cyprus? Yes. But in the years since the boy left, the Templars had bought the island of Cyprus from Richard the Lionheart. It was now their sovereign territory. It was the only place on earth where the Templar Grand Master was the absolute head of state. It was time to return. But this time, he wouldn't go as a frightened boy in a mask. He would go as the commander. The masked king was going home to build his final fortress, and he was taking the plans for the new world with him. In the history of nations, kingdoms are usually won by blood. They are conquered by armies, seized by usurpers, or inherited by birth. But in the year 1191, something unprecedented happened. A kingdom was bought. King Richard the Lionheart, having conquered the island of Cyprus on his way to the Crusades, needed quick cash to pay his soldiers. He put the island up for sale. The buyers were the Knights Templar. The price was 100,000 gold bezants, a sum so staggering it could have bankrupted France. Historians treat this as a footnote. They say the Templars bought it as an investment, found it too hard to manage, and sold it a year later. But the veiled history suggests this transaction was the linchpin of the entire survival strategy. Why did the Templars need an island? Because on an island, you control the borders. On an island, you control the ports. And most importantly, on an island owned by a private military corporation, the Pope's law does not apply. The Templars were building a black site. In late 1192, a ship arrived in the harbor of Limassol. It was not a warship. It was a merchant vessel flying Portuguese colors. On board was a man in his early 20s. He wore the robes of a high-ranking Templar diplomat. His face was hidden behind a visor of polished steel and leather, a modification of the battle helms of the era, but worn constantly. This was the Heir. The boy who had fled Jerusalem in a coffin, survived the Leper Ship, and trained in the mountains of Portugal, had returned. He was no longer John the shepherd. He was the commander. He stepped onto the docks of Cyprus. He looked at the Crusader flags fluttering in the wind. He knew that this island was not just dirt and rock. It was a laboratory. Here, safe from the spies of the Vatican and the armies of Saladin, the order could begin the work of building a new Jerusalem. But there was a complication, a ghost from the past. To manage the population of Cyprus, the Templars had installed a puppet king. And of all the people in the world, they chose the one man the Heir hated most. Guy de Lusignan, the usurper, the man who had stolen Baldwin IV's throne, the man who had lost the true cross at Hattin. Why would the Templars give a crown to their worst enemy? It was a masterstroke of shadow politics. By putting Guy on the throne, the Templars made him the target. If the Vatican sent assassins, they would go for the king. If Saladin attacked, he would attack the king. Guy de Lusignan was the public face. He was the lightning rod. But the real power resided in the Templar fortress of Gastria and the mountain citadel of St. Hilarion. There, in the high towers, the masked commander held the true court. He controlled the treasury. He controlled the navy. He controlled the intelligence network. Guy de Lusignan was the king of Cyprus by title, but the heir of Baldwin was the king of the order. This dynamic created the first deep state. The heir sat in his tower, looking down at the palace where Guy held his feasts. He saw the incompetence. He saw the vanity. And he learned the most valuable lesson of statecraft. Invisibility is power. As long as no one knew he existed, he could not be overthrown. With the island secured, the heir began a massive construction project. He didn't build palaces for luxury. He built machines of stone. The city of Famagusta on the eastern coast of Cyprus became the new headquarters of the operation. If you visit Famagusta today, you will see something eerie. Rising out of the Mediterranean palm trees and the dust are massive, soaring Gothic cathedrals. They look like they were teleported from Paris or Rheims. They are out of place in the Middle East. Why build French Gothic cathedrals on a Greek island? Because Gothic architecture is not just a style, it is a technology. The heir possessed the scrolls from Solomon's stables, the Atlantean blueprints, as discussed in the Solomon script. He knew that specific geometric shapes, the pointed arch, the ribbed vault, the flying buttress, create a resonant cavity. These buildings were amplifiers. The Templars used Famagusta as a server farm. They stored the archives in the crypts beneath the Cathedral of St. Nicholas. They used the acoustics of the cathedral to perform the Gnostic rituals of initiation. rituals that required specific sonic frequencies to open the mind of the candidate. But the most important construction was not the cathedral, it was the bank. Cyprus became the financial hub of the Mediterranean. The Heir, utilizing the banking codes developed by the order, turned the island into the world's first offshore tax haven. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, and France deposited their gold in the Templar vaults of Famagusta to avoid the taxes of the Pope and the kings. The Heir sat at the center of this web of gold. He watched the wealth of Europe flow through his fingers. He used it to buy silence. He used it to buy weapons. And he used it to fund the exploration division. From the port of Famagusta, the Heir launched secret expeditions. He sent ships back to the Atlantic. He sent ships to Africa. He was looking for the mines of Ophir mentioned in his ancestor Solomon's journals. He was preparing the exit strategy for the day when Europe would burn. But amidst the gold and the stone, the Heir was suffering. The mask was heavy. He was a man now, in his prime. He desired a wife. He desired a normal life. But the Iron Mask protocol forbade it. He could never show his face. He could never claim his name. He was a prisoner of his own survival. And the Vatican hadn't stopped hunting. The Inquisitor General in Rome had died, but his successor was even more ruthless. The new spies reported strange things from Cyprus. They reported a hidden commander who never removed his helm. They reported that King Guy was terrified of the Templars. The Vatican realized that Cyprus was a cancer. It was a sovereign state run by heretics. They couldn't invade it militarily, the Templar fleet was too strong, so they decided to invade it biologically. Guy de Lusignan died, some say of sadness, some say of poison administered by the Templars to clear the board. His brother, Amalric, took the throne. The puppet changed, but the puppet masters remained. But in the winter of 1195, a ship arrived in Famagusta from Sicily. It carried silk and spices. But in the hold, released by a Vatican agent, were rats. Rats carrying the Yersinia pestis, or perhaps a weaponized strain of smallpox. The Black Guard was trying to trigger an epidemic. They knew the hidden commander lived in the citadel. They hoped the disease would scale the walls that soldiers could not. Sickness swept through Famagusta. Knights began to die. The streets filled with bodies. The Heir was trapped in the citadel. He looked out at the dying city. He realized the ruthlessness of his enemy. The church would burn the whole world just to kill one man. But the Heir had an advantage. He carried the blood of the Leper King. Whether it was genetic immunity developed over generations of exposure, or the secret alchemical medicines of the order, the Heir did not get sick. He walked through the plague wards of the citadel, tending to his men, his mask filtering the air, a primitive gas mask. He survived, and his survival reinforced the legend among the Templars. "He is the immortal one," they whispered. "Death cannot touch him." This reverence was dangerous. It was turning the order into a cult of personality. The Heir realized he had to step back. He had to disappear again. He called a meeting of the inner circle. "Cyprus is a fortress," he told them, "but it is also a cage. The church knows we are here. We must decentralize." He initiated protocol, dispersion. The order would split. One branch would stay in Cyprus and the Holy Land, maintaining the public face of the Crusades. But the core, the bloodline and the archives, would move back to the shadows of Europe. They would not go as an army. They would go as ghosts. They would infiltrate the royal houses of Europe. They would marry into the families of their enemies. They would breed the dragon blood into the Habsburgs, the Bourbons, the Sinclairs. The heir himself, now a man of 40, prepared for his final journey. He handed the command of Cyprus to his lieutenants. He took off the steel battle mask and replaced it with a mask of black velvet. He boarded a ship heading for Venice. Why Venice? Because Venice was the enemy of Rome. Venice cared only for gold. And in the labyrinth of canals and masks of the Venetian carnival, a man with no face could hide forever. The Leper King's secret was leaving the Middle East. It was moving into the heart of the Renaissance. The heir was about to become the puppet master of Europe. But before he left a warning carved into the stone of the Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Famagusta, a Latin inscription that is still there today, if you know where to look. It reads, "The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone." It was a message to the Vatican. You rejected my father, you rejected me, but we are the foundation of the world you live in. The heir sailed into the sunset. Behind him, the Gothic spires of Famagusta glowed like fingers pointing accusingly at God. The fortress was secure. The bank was open. The empire of the mask had begun. Venice, 1300s. If you want to hide a tree, you plant it in a forest. If you want to hide a man without a face, you send him to a city where no one has a face. After fleeing Cyprus, the masked heir, the descendant of Baldwin IV, settled in the Republic of Venice. Venice was the perfect sanctuary. It was the enemy of the Pope. It was a city of spies, merchants, and assassins, and most importantly, it was the city of the carnival. For 6 months of the year, the Venetian nobility wore masks. The bauta, a white mask that covers the face but allows eating. The moretta, a black velvet mask held in place by biting a button. And the volto, the ghost face. In Venice, anonymity was not suspicious. It was a right. It was a social tool that allowed the rich to sin without consequence. But for the heir of Jerusalem, the mask was not a toy. It was a life support system. The Black Guard of the Vatican was still hunting him. They searched the palaces of Europe for a man with the Anjou features, the distinctive bone structure of the Leper King's family. But in Venice, they couldn't find him. The heir, now the patriarch of a hidden family, lived openly. He attended the balls. He sat in the councils of the Doge. He banked with the Templar financiers. But he never, ever showed his face. To the Venetians, he was known as Il Principe senza nome, the nameless prince. Rumors swirled that he was disfigured by a fire, or that he had taken a vow of penance. The truth was simpler. Facial recognition was the only way the enemy could identify him. By deleting his face, he deleted the target. During this period, the bloodline did not stay stagnant. It merged. The heir married into the black nobility of Venice and northern Italy, the families of Este, Sforza, and Savoy. They bred the dragon blood of Baldwin into the royal houses of Europe. They were playing the long game of genetics. If they couldn't sit on the throne of Jerusalem, they would put their DNA on every throne in Christendom. But genetics is a double-edged sword. Traits resurface. In the mid-1600s, deep within the French royal court, a child was born. He wasn't supposed to exist. But when the midwives looked at his face, they gasped. He didn't look like a Bourbon. He looked like a king from an ancient painting. He had the eyes of the lion. The existence of this child triggered a crisis that would lead to the most famous imprisonment in human history. The King of France, Louis XIV, the Sun King, realized that he had a rival who possessed a divine right older and stronger than his own. He couldn't kill him. The curse of Mole protected the blood. So he decided to initiate the Iron Mask Protocol. The year is 1669. A carriage moves through the French countryside at night, surrounded by a squadron of musketeers. Inside sits a man. He is tall, elegant, and speaks with the refinement of a prince. But his head is encased in a strange contraption. History calls it the Iron Mask. Legends say it was a solid metal helmet rusted to his flesh. But the veiled history and the secret correspondence of the jailer Saint Mars reveals the truth. It was a mask of black velvet, hardened with whalebone and secured with steel springs. It was designed for one purpose: total redaction. The prisoner was taken to the fortress of Pignerol. He was placed in a cell with triple doors. The governor of the prison, Saint Mars, was given a specific order by the king's minister of war, Louvois. If he speaks of anything other than his physical needs, kill him instantly. Why such extreme security? If he was just a criminal, why not hang him? If he was a political rival, why not behead him? Because the prisoner was an asset. The king knew that this man carried the blood of the Grail, the Baldwin Templar line. To spill his blood was to invite cosmic retribution, but to let him be seen was to invite revolution. The veiled history suggests that the prisoner looked exactly like Louis XIV. Was he a twin, or was Louis XIV actually a bastard and the prisoner the true king? Or perhaps the resemblance went back further. Perhaps he looked like Jesus, if we accept the Desposini theory. Whatever the truth, the mask was the only way to contain the information hazard of his face. The prisoner spent 34 years in custody. He was moved from Pignerol to the Exiles Islands, and finally to the Bastille. Throughout those 3 decades, the protocol never changed. He was treated with bizarre reverence. Saint Mars stood while the prisoner sat. The prisoner was served the finest food on silver platters. He was given lace shirts and books. This is the behavior of a jailer toward a superior. But the prisoner was not passive. He was a Templar heir. He tried to communicate. There is a famous story that one day, the prisoner took a silver plate and scratched a message onto it with a fork. He threw the plate out the window of his tower toward a fisherman on the beach. The fisherman picked it up and brought it to the governor. Saint Mars looked at the plate. He looked at the fisherman. "Have you read what is written here?" he asked. "I cannot read," the fisherman replied. "You are lucky," Saint Mars said. "If you could read, you would be dead." What was written on the plate? Was it his name, or was it a code? Was he signaling the invisible army, the Freemasons, that he was still alive? The Iron Mask Protocol was a psychological experiment. It stripped a man of his ego. It reduced him to a voice and a body, but no identity. It was the same training Baldwin IV had given his son in the dark stables of Jerusalem. You are a ghost. You are nothing. The prisoner endured it. He did not go mad. He maintained his dignity. He was practicing the silence of the order. November 19th, 1703, the prisoner, now an old man, died in the Bastille. The official register records his name as Marchioli. But the burial was a sham. The veiled history suggests that the body was treated with chemical agents, quicklime, to dissolve the face, just in case someone dug it up. His cell was scrubbed. The floor tiles were replaced. The furniture was burned. The state tried to delete him from reality, but they failed. Because the Iron Mask had become a symbol. Voltaire, a Freemason, wrote about him. The story spread across Europe. The faceless king became the patron saint of the oppressed. His suffering fueled the anger that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. But here is the twist. Did the bloodline end in the Bastille? Did the Vatican finally win? No. The veiled history suggests that the prisoner Marchioli was a volunteer. He was a member of the family who agreed to take the fall. He agreed to be the decoy. While the king's spies were obsessed with the man in the mask, the true heir, the younger brother or the son, had already slipped away. Where did he go? He went to the one place in Europe where the Templars were not hiding, but ruling: Scotland. The timeline reconnects. The blood of Baldwin merged with the blood of Sinclair. They realized that Europe was a trap. France was a trap. Even Scotland was becoming dangerous. They needed a new continent. And so, the legacy of the Leper King moved west. The mask was taken off. The silver plate was melted down. But the idea remained. The idea that a king does not need a crown. He needs a brotherhood. The descendants of the Leper King became the grand masters of the Scottish Rite. They encoded the secrets of Jerusalem into the rituals of the lodge. The wounded king, the lost word, the search for the light. These aren't just myths. They are the biography of Baldwin IV and his son. When a mason rolls up his pant leg to expose his knee, a ritual part of the initiation, he is mimicking the disfigurement of the leper. When he wears the hoodwink blindfold, he is mimicking the darkness of the stables. The ritual is a memory device. It ensures that the story of the escape is never forgotten, even if the members don't understand what they are acting out. But the physical treasure, the gold of Jerusalem that Baldwin IV gave to the Templars, was still in play. It had traveled from Jerusalem to Cyprus, from Cyprus to Scotland, and in 1795 it would be moved to its final resting place, to a small island in Nova Scotia called Oak Island. The money pit wasn't built by pirates. It was built by the heirs of the Leper King to hide the treasury of a kingdom that no longer existed. And the traps in that pit? The flood tunnels? They are the same hydraulic engineering used by Solomon. The technology had come full circle. The Leper King was dead. The prisoner was dead. But the secret was safe, buried under 90 feet of earth, waiting for the day when the new Jerusalem would rise in the west. The mask had served its purpose. Now it was time for the face to be revealed. But the face wasn't a man. It was a nation. If you are a species on the brink of extinction, you have two choices. You can hide in a cave and hope the predators don't find you. This was the strategy of the Iron Mask. Or you can do something bolder, something riskier. You can lay your eggs in the predator's nest. By the 18th century, the secret order guarding the bloodline of Baldwin IV realized that hiding was no longer a viable long-term strategy. The world was shrinking. Maps were getting better. Spies were everywhere. The Iron Mask protocol had saved the life of the heir, but it had cost him his freedom. They needed a new protocol. They needed to move from defense to offense. They decided to stop hiding the bloodline and start injecting it. They looked at the royal houses of Europe, the Bourbons, the Habsburgs, the Savoys, the Hanovers. These families were powerful, but they were genetically weak. They were old blood, stagnant, inbred, and prone to madness. The Templars realized that these dynasties were perfect hosts. The plan was simple: marry into the power. They would take the daughters and sons of the masked line, the descendants of the Leper King who had been living in secret in Scotland and Venice, and they would marry them into the ruling families. It was a genetic Trojan horse. Once the dragon blood of Jerusalem entered the bloodstream of a European dynasty, it would dominate. It is a dominant gene. It carries the traits of the survivor, high intelligence, ruthlessness, and a biological resilience forged in the fires of the Crusades. The goal was to make the secret king the ancestor of all kings. They didn't need to overthrow the monarchs. They just needed to become them. The first phase of the merger began where the escape ended. Scotland. The clan Sinclair, St. Clair, had been the guardians of the Templar treasure since 1314. They built Rosslyn Chapel. They shielded the orphan of the pyre. But they weren't just bodyguards. They were the incubators. The veiled history suggests that the male line of the Sinclairs merged with the female line of the Jerusalem kings, Baldwin's descendants. This created a super lineage. The Sinclairs became the Rex Deus families of the North. Look at their coat of arms. It features an engrailed cross, a cross with scalloped edges. In heraldry, engrailed means protected or earthbound. It is the symbol of a holy lineage hidden within the earth. From Scotland, this bloodline began to spread south. When James VI of Scotland became James I of England in 1603, uniting the crowns, the Templar bloodline quietly moved into London. The Stuarts were sympathetic to the Masons. They were initiates, but the Stuarts were messy. They got beheaded, Charles the Thurston. They got exiled. The order needed a more stable host, a family that was quieter, richer, and more secretive. They looked to the Alps, to the border of France and Italy. They looked to the House of Savoy. The House of Savoy is one of the oldest royal families in the world. They ruled parts of Italy and Switzerland for 1,000 years, but their most famous possession wasn't a castle or a crown. It was a piece of cloth, the Shroud of Turin. For centuries, the Savoys owned the shroud. They kept it in a private chapel. They refused to let the Vatican control it. Why? History says they bought it from a French knight, but the veiled history suggests a different transfer of ownership. The shroud was the Templar flag. The Templars possessed it in the 13th century. It was the head folded 4 times to show only the face, the mandilion. When the order was persecuted, they needed to hide the relic. They gave it to the Savoys, not as a gift, but as a dowry. A masked heir of the Templar line married into the House of Savoy in the 1400s. She brought the shroud with her as proof of her identity. "I bring the face of the ancestor," she might have said. The Savoys became the new guardians. And with the infusion of Templar blood, they rose from minor counts to kings of Italy. They were the buffer state between the Pope and the rest of Europe. And deep within their archives in Turin, they protected the genealogies that proved their right to rule Jerusalem. But the most aggressive phase of the merger happened in Germany and Austria. The target was the most powerful family on earth, the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs ruled the Holy Roman Empire. They controlled Spain, Austria, the Netherlands, and half of the New World. They were the titans of the Catholic Church. To infiltrate them was to infiltrate the Vatican itself. The Invisible Army arranged marriages. They introduced minor nobility from Scotland and Portugal into the Habsburg court. Women with obscure titles but impeccable pedigrees. And slowly, the blood changed. We see the evidence in the medical pathology. Starting in the 16th century, a strange mutation appeared in the Habsburg line. We call it the Habsburg jaw, mandibular prognathism. The lower jaw grows too large. The tongue swells. The face becomes deformed. Historians blame this on simple incest, uncle-niece marriages. But the veiled history suggests it is a reemergence of the leper's gene. King Baldwin IV lost his face to leprosy. His tissues collapsed. The Habsburg jaw is a genetic echo of that deformity. It is the physical mark of the hybrid. But it wasn't just the jaw. It was the blood. A new disease began to plague the royal families of Europe, spreading from the Habsburgs to the House of Hanover, Queen Victoria. Hemophilia, the blood that does not clot, the royal disease. Look at the symbolism. The leper king's blood was poisoned, but potent. The hemophiliac's blood is too thin to be contained. It flows too freely. It is a blood that refuses to be bound by the body. To the esotericist, hemophilia is the marker of the sangreal. It signifies a body that is vibrating at a frequency too high for its physical vessel. The spirit is trying to escape the flesh. By the 19th century, almost every monarch in Europe carried this gene. Queen Victoria, Tsar Nicholas II, the Kaiser. They were all cousins. They were all carriers. The merger was complete. The descendants of the masked boy, the child smuggled out of Jerusalem in a coffin, were now sitting on the thrones of England, Russia, Germany, and Spain. The Templars had won the Game of Thrones. They had replaced the divine right of the Church with the biological right of the survivor. But there was a problem. The hosts were dying. The monarchies were becoming obsolete. The people were rising up thanks to the Masonic revolutions we discussed in the previous script. The parasite needed to jump again. It realized that kings were losing power to a new class of rulers, the bankers. The final phase of the merger was not with royalty. It was with capital. The bloodline moved from the palaces to the city of London. They married into the banking dynasties. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Warburgs. They traded titles for assets. They traded the crown of Jerusalem for the board of directors. This explains the modern obsession of the elite with genealogy. Why do American presidents all trace their lineage back to European royalty? Example: Bush and Obama are distant cousins, both related to the royal family. Why do billionaires obsess over legacy? Because they know the secret. They know that they are not self-made men. They are the keepers of the stream. They are the current vessels for a genetic code that has been fighting for survival for 900 years. The Leper King never died. He just multiplied. His DNA is now the operating system of the global elite. His resilience, his pain tolerance, and his ability to wear a mask. These are the traits required to rule the modern world. But there is one loose end: the treasure. The physical gold and the artifacts that Baldwin IV gave to the Templars. The bloodline survived, yes. But did they keep the money? The veiled history says yes. And they hid it in the one place where the New Jerusalem was destined to rise. They didn't hide it in a bank. They hid it in a pit. The final chapters of our saga must return to the physical evidence. We must go to the money pit on Oak Island, because the treasure of Baldwin is the foundation of the American empire. Gold is heavy. This is the fundamental problem of wealth. A single bar of gold weighs about 27 pounds. A chest of gold requires 2 men to lift. A treasury requires a fleet of wagons. When a kingdom falls, the king usually loses his gold because he cannot move it fast enough. But King Baldwin IV was a strategist. He knew Jerusalem was doomed. He knew that after his death, the looting would begin. So in the final years of his life, he initiated a liquidation protocol. The veiled history suggests that Baldwin IV did not keep the royal treasury in the palace. He slowly, methodically transferred it to the custody of the Knights Templar. Why? Because the Templars were the only ones with the infrastructure to move it. They had the ships, they had the secure vaults in Acre and Tyre, and they had the banking codes to make the physical assets disappear into paper credit. But there were some things that could not be turned into paper. There were the relics, the crown jewels of Jerusalem, the golden menorah of the Second Temple, rumored to be hidden in the Vatican, but perhaps reclaimed by the Templars. The immense reserves of bullion mined from the Ophir roots. When the funeral procession of Baldwin IV left Jerusalem, as described in chapter 5, the coffin of the ghost child wasn't the only thing leaving the city. Under the cover of the mourning crowds, a convoy of heavy carts, ostensibly carrying grain or timber for the siege defenses, was moving toward the coast. These carts contained the seed capital of the New World. The treasure traveled the same route as the Heir, from Jerusalem to Tyre, from Tyre to Cyprus, from Cyprus to Scotland, Rosslyn. But Scotland was not a vault. It was a transit station. The Sinclairs knew they couldn't keep that much gold in a castle. It would attract armies. They needed a place that was off the map. This leads us to the Oak Island mystery. For 200 years, treasure hunters have been digging holes on a small island in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia. They have found coconut fibers, ancient coins, and stone ciphers. 6 men have died trying to reach the bottom. They call it the money pit. But the design of the pit tells a different story. It wasn't dug by pirates like Captain Kidd. Pirates dig holes in the sand. This pit was engineered. It is a 200-foot shaft dug through clay and limestone. Every 10 feet, there is a platform of oak logs, but the true genius lies in the hydraulics. At the 90-foot level, there is a booby trap. A tunnel leads from the ocean to the shaft. If you dig past a certain point, the plug is pulled, and seawater rushes in, flooding the chamber instantly. Who possessed the technology to build a hydraulic water trap in the pre-industrial era? Who knew how to redirect the tides? The same men who built the water systems beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The same men who built the dry docks of La Rochelle, the Templar engineers. The Money Pit is a copy of the Enochian Vault, a legendary structure described in Masonic texts, consisting of 9 vertical arches buried deep in the earth to protect the sacred name from the flood. The Templars didn't build a pirate stash. They built a federal reserve. In 1804, diggers found a stone at the 90-foot level. It bore a strange inscription in geometric ciphers. The accepted translation is, 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried. Historians laugh at this. They say it's a hoax, but apply the semantic pivot. In the 18th century, pounds meant British sterling currency. But to a Templar, pounds might refer to weight, or it might be a coded reference to the talents of Solomon. If the inscription is genuine, it is not a treasure map. It is a deposit slip. It is a marker left by the builders to tell the future account holders, the initiates, that the assets are secure. The carbon dating of the coconut fiber found in the flood tunnels dates to 1260–1400 AD. This aligns perfectly with the timeline of the Templar escape from Europe, 1307, and the voyage of Henry Sinclair, 1398. So what was in the pit? It wasn't just gold. Gold is useful, but it doesn't rule the world. The veiled history suggests the pit contained the documents, the land deeds to the New Jerusalem, the genealogies of the bloodline, proving the heir's right to rule. The blueprints for the Solomonic government, republic. The pit was a time capsule. It was designed to hold these assets until the bloodline was strong enough to claim the continent. For 300 years, the treasure sat in the dark, protected by the ocean and the trap. The masked heirs in Europe knew it was there. It was their insurance policy. If the kings of Europe ever hunted them to extinction, they could flee to Nova Scotia, open the vault, and have the capital to build an army. But they didn't need an army. They needed a revolution. By the mid-1700s, the Freemasons, the public face of the Templars, were ready to make their move. Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and the Marquis de Lafayette were coordinating a transatlantic rebellion. Revolutions are expensive. You need muskets. You need ships. You need to pay soldiers. The Continental Congress was broke. The currency was worthless. Where did the money come from? This is the most controversial theory in the Templar saga. The theory states that the money pit was emptied just before the American Revolution. There is a gap in the history of Oak Island. Between the 1750s and the discovery by the teenagers in 1795, the island was owned by men with deep Masonic connections. Did a team of Masonic engineers arrive secretly? Did they know the location of the shut-off valve for the flood tunnels? Logic dictates that if you build a trap, you also build a way to disarm it. Did they descend into the pit, bypass the water, and retrieve the gold of Baldwin? If this is true, then the treasure of Jerusalem was used to finance the United States of America. The gold that once sat in Solomon's temple paid for the gunpowder at Bunker Hill. The silver that was minted in Tyre paid for the ink on the Declaration of Independence. This changes the entire narrative of America. The USA is not a Christian nation. It is a Templar nation. It is the new Jerusalem that Baldwin IV dreamed of. A place where the king has no power and the builder is sovereign. Look at the evidence in the architecture. Washington, D.C. is laid out in Masonic geometry, as discussed in previous scripts. But look at the symbols of wealth. The dollar bill, the pyramid, the eye, the Latin motto Novus Ordo Seclorum, and the phrase, "In God we trust." Which God? The God of the Vatican? Or the great architect of the Templars? The treasure wasn't just spent, it was transmuted. The physical gold was turned into political capital. It was used to buy a continent. But what about the ghost child? The bloodline? If the treasure was recovered, where is the family? They didn't disappear. They evolved. They stopped being kings in exile and became the first families of America. The Roosevelts, the Bushes, the Rockefellers. If you trace their genealogies back far enough, you find the connections to the European nobility, to the Stuarts, to the Sinclairs. They are the masked heirs of the modern age. They don't wear leather masks anymore. They wear business suits. They wear the pins of the Skull and Bones Society. But they are still guarding the legacy. And the money pit? Why are people still digging there today? Why do the Lagina brothers of the TV show keep finding artifacts but no main vault? Because the vault is empty. The curse of Oak Island, that 7 must die before the treasure is found, is a lingering defense mechanism. The trap is still active, even though the bird has flown. It is a decoy, a distraction. While the world watches the hole in the ground in Nova Scotia, the real treasure is circulating in the global economy. The gold of the Leper King is in the servers of Wall Street. The power of the Templars is in the Pentagon. The secret has been successfully transplanted. The body of Baldwin IV rotted away in 1185, but his will, his desire to create a kingdom that could defy the East and the West, has been realized. He built a superpower. But every empire has a lifespan. The Templars built America to be the new Atlantis, but Atlantis sank. Solomon's temple was destroyed. The kingdom of Jerusalem fell. Now, as the American empire enters its chaotic phase, the heirs are facing a new crisis. The system they built is crumbling. The debt is unpayable. The blood is thinning. They need a new plan, a new exodus. This brings us to the final chapter. The Leper King returns, not as a man, but as a paradigm. The cycle is closing, and the mask is about to come off for the last time. History moves in circles. What starts in the blood ends in the blood. In 1185, King Baldwin IV died of leprosy. His body was a ruin. His flesh was necrotic. To the medieval mind, he was cursed by God. But the veiled history suggests that biology is not a moral judgment. It is an evolutionary crucible. The descendants of the masked heir, the boy smuggled out of Jerusalem in a coffin, did not inherit the leprosy. The Templar geneticists, the alchemists of the order, ensured that. But they did inherit something else from the Leper King. They inherited his resilience. Think about the physiology of Baldwin IV. He lived for years with a disease that should have killed him in months. He rode into battle when he had no hands. He commanded armies when he was blind. His will was stronger than his biology. This trait, the ability to override pain, to suppress weakness, to rule through sheer mental force, is the defining characteristic of the dragon bloodline. In the 21st century, we see this trait in the global elite. Look at the men who run the world, the octogenarian bankers, the ancient politicians. They seem indestructible. They live far longer than the average citizen. They seem immune to the stresses that crush normal people. Is it just better healthcare? Or is it genetics? The veiled history suggests that the bloodline of Baldwin IV has been carefully concentrated over 800 years. They are not lepers. They are the opposite. They are hyperimmune. They have bred a caste of humans who are biologically distinct. And just as Baldwin IV had to hide his face behind a silver mask to rule Jerusalem, the modern elite must hide their true nature behind a mask of democracy. They know that if the public saw them for what they really are, a separate species of predator, bound by ancient blood oaths and secret banking codes, we would revolt. So they wear the mask, they smile for the cameras, they shake hands, they wear business suits. But underneath the suit, the Templar armor is still there. Where does the king live today? He doesn't live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is still a war zone, just as it was in 1187. The peace that Saladin and Balian negotiated was only a temporary ceasefire. The real New Jerusalem is not a city of faith, it is a city of capital. If you go to London, there is a distinct square mile known as the City of London. It is the financial heart of the world, but legally it is not part of the United Kingdom. It is a sovereign corporation. The Queen or King of England has to ask permission to enter. It has its own police force, its own laws. It pays no taxes. Look at the symbols in the city. The Temple Bar, the gate. The Temple Church, the original round church of the Knights Templar. The dragons guarding the entrances. This is the Templar state. This is where the treasure of Baldwin, the gold from the money pit, eventually ended up. It wasn't spent, it was leveraged. It formed the capital base of the modern banking system. The veiled history suggests that the heir of the Leper King is not a single person sitting on a throne. The heir is the corporation. The Templars were the first corporation. They were the first entity to exist separately from the individuals who ran it. A Grand Master could die, but the order lived on. This is the secret of immortality. You don't need a body if you have a trust fund. The spirit of Baldwin IV, the spirit of the king who sacrificed everything to hold the line, now inhabits the algorithm of the global market. It is ruthless. It is blind, like Baldwin. It cannot feel pain, like Baldwin. And it demands total submission. We are living in the kingdom of the mask. We think we are free citizens, but in reality, we are the serfs of a feudal system that simply changed its name to capitalism. We pay tithes, taxes to the order. We fight their wars in the desert. We obey their laws. And just like the people of 12th century Jerusalem, we are surrounded by enemies we cannot see, protected by a king we are not allowed to look at. But every mask eventually slips. Baldwin IV could not hide his disease forever. Eventually, the smell of the rot permeated the silk robes. The modern system is beginning to rot. The debt is unpayable. The wars are unending. The social contract is breaking down. The people are starting to ask questions. Who really runs the world? Where did the money go? Why are we always at war? This is the moment the Templars have been preparing for since 1187. They know that when the system collapses, the mob comes for the king. They saw it happen in Paris in 1307. They saw it happen in 1793. So they have prepared a final exit strategy. Just as they moved the ghost child from Jerusalem to Tyre, and from Tyre to Cyprus, and from Cyprus to Scotland, they are preparing to move the core again. But where? There are no new continents to discover. The map is full. The veiled history suggests the next destination is not horizontal. It is vertical. They are looking up. The billionaires, the modern inheritors of the Templar wealth, are obsessed with space. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, they are building rockets. They are talking about Mars. They are building arcs. Is this exploration, or is it evacuation? Are they preparing to leave the leper colony, Earth, behind? Are they planning to take the genetic asset, the perfected DNA of the bloodline, and establish a new kingdom on a new world, leaving the rest of us to deal with the fire and the plague? The cycle of the Leper King is closing. The suffering. The king bears the burden of the world. The mask. The king hides his true nature to maintain order. The escape. The king abandons the dying city to save the blood. We are currently in phase 2. We are staring at the mask, but the ships are being loaded in the harbor. The coffin is being prepared. The story of the Knights Templar is not a history lesson. It is a warning. They are the ultimate survivors. They will do whatever it takes to ensure their line continues. They will sacrifice armies. They will sacrifice cities. They will sacrifice nations. And as you sit here watching this video, ask yourself, are you part of the bloodline, or are you part of the distraction? Because when the bells of Jerusalem toll for the final time, and the gates are locked, only those with the key will be allowed on the boat. The Leper King is dead. Long live the hidden king.